Welcome to the Unseen Whispers, where the stories linger long after the night fades. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let us know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, because some stories feel different in the dead of night. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Story 1. The Rattlesnake Man of Arizona. The Arizona desert stretched out, a vast wasteland under a sky that seemed to burn with unrelenting intensity. There was no escape from it, no way to flee its oppressive grasp. Even the most seasoned wanderers, those with survival instincts, honed by years of desert travel, felt small and insignificant in this barren land. The sun was merciless, casting its golden wrath across everything in sight, until even the rocks looked as though they might melt. Ethan Walker was not new to the desert. In fact, he had always been drawn to the stark beauty of these lands, the desolation that seemed to mirror his own sense of isolation. He had come here on a mission, a search for a family legacy, an old map passed down from his great-grandfather that might lead to something buried in these unforgiving sands. What he didn't know was that the desert had its own secrets, ones that no man had the right to uncover. The rattling sound was the first indication that something was wrong. At first, Ethan thought he was imagining it. The dry winds carried strange sounds across the landscape, and after hours of walking, the heat could play tricks on the mind. But then it came again, the unmistakable hiss of a rattlesnake. Ethan's heart quickened, and he glanced around warily. There was no movement, no sign of the creature, just the endless sea of sand and the jagged rocks that cut the horizon like the remains of some forgotten age. Just a trick of the wind, he muttered to himself, though even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at the pit of his stomach. The desert had always been a place of silence, of stillness. This sound, this rattle, felt wrong. He continued walking, trying to ignore the feeling crawling beneath his skin. The desert was known for its harshness, its ability to drive men mad. Maybe that was all this was, some fleeting hallucination, a product of the heat and his exhaustion. But as the rattle grew louder, more insistent, he couldn't help but feel the chill of something far darker, more primal. The rattlesnake's sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to echo from every direction. Each step Ethan took was met with a growing sense of dread. The blistering heat, the sand that shifted beneath his feet, it all seemed to blur together in a haze of impending doom. Ethan paused for a moment, glancing around. The desert stretched before him, empty and still. He pulled his canteen from his bag, taking a long, measured drink. The water tasted stale, but it was all he had. He wiped his brow, trying to clear the sweat that beaded on his forehead, when his eyes fell upon his arm. A small blister had appeared on his forearm, where the skin was tender from the sun. At first, it seemed like a mere irritation from the relentless exposure, but when he looked closer, he noticed something strange. Tiny black scales, like the markings of a snake, beginning to form beneath the surface of his skin. He froze. "No," he whispered, rubbing at the blister. It felt warm to the touch, and as his fingers brushed it, the scales seemed to move, rippling beneath the skin. Ethan staggered back, nearly dropping his canteen in panic. He had heard stories, of course. Everyone had. The legend of the Rattlesnake Man, the creature who arose from the desert when a man disturbed its balance. a half-human, half-serpent monstrosity that haunted the land, leaving behind nothing but tales of terror. But these were just stories, weren't they? Myths passed down through generations, old wives' tales designed to scare children. Yet, as the blister on his arm began to spread, the scales growing darker, thicker, a part of him couldn't dismiss the possibility. Could it be true? Was he truly being cursed by the desert? The rattle came again, louder this time, as though in response to his thoughts. It was closer now, and Ethan could feel a tremor of something ancient and powerful in the air. He turned and began walking faster, his steps growing frantic. The scales on his arm were spreading now, creeping up his neck, down his chest. He could feel them, every inch of them, as though they were alive beneath his skin. The transformation had begun. Ethan's mind raced. He needed to find shelter, a place to rest and try to think. But the desert was unforgiving, nothing but endless stretches of rock and sand. His great-grandfather had spoken of a place, a hidden ruin somewhere deep in the desert, where the answers might lie. Perhaps there, in the forgotten corners of the world, he could uncover the truth behind the curse. But his hope was quickly dwindling. The transformation was accelerating, each moment more intense than the last. The scales had now spread over his entire arm, and his fingers were beginning to curl, turning into elongated, sharp claws. The rattle echoed again, and Ethan's head snapped around. The sound was growing, multiplying, as though the snakes were closing in. He knew he couldn't outrun them. Whatever fate awaited him, he was bound to it now. Suddenly the ground beneath him shifted, and with a deep rumbling noise, a large rock slide cascaded from a nearby cliff. Ethan jumped back in alarm, but the movement was slow, deliberate, like the ground itself was shifting in response to his presence. His breath caught in his throat as he looked down at his hands. They were no longer human. The fingers had elongated, covered in thick reptilian scales that gleamed darkly in the dying sunlight. In a panic, he tried to peel the skin away, to tear the transformation from his body, but it was futile. The curse had taken hold. The rattle came again, closer, louder, as though the snakes were right behind him, watching his every move. They had been waiting for him, guiding him to this point. And now, there was no turning back. For what felt like days, Ethan wandered deeper into the desert, his body changing with each step. The transformation was painful, excruciating, but he couldn't stop it. His skin had become more snake-like, his body less human with every passing hour. His mind, too, was beginning to fray. He felt the urge to slither, to shed his old self, to become one with the desert. The sound of the rattle surrounded him, a constant reminder of what he was becoming. The snakes had not been his enemies. They were his guides. He had read about the ancient stories of the rattlesnake man, about how those who disrupted the delicate balance between man and nature were punished. But Ethan hadn't understood the full extent of the curse. Now he did. The transformation wasn't just a punishment, it was a rebirth, a way for the desert to reclaim what had been disturbed. But as the transformation continued, Ethan began to lose himself. He no longer thought of his family, his past, or his mission. He was becoming something else, something born of myth and desert lore. He was a creature of the land, bound to its secrets and its curses. In the heart of the desert, he found what he had been looking for, the ruin of an ancient civilization, long forgotten by time. Here, he discovered the truth. The snakes had been waiting for him, guiding him to this place. And as he stepped into the shadow of the ruins, the last vestiges of his humanity slipped away. Ethan Walker was no more. The creature that emerged from the depths of the desert was a legend, a being of myth and terror. The rattlesnakes that once followed him now served as his companions, and he became one with them, his body shifting into a monstrous form, half man, half snake. The desert had claimed him, and his story would live on in whispers, an omen to those who dared to venture too far into the unknown. His rattles could be heard on the wind, a warning to all who dared disturb the land. The rattlesnake man walked to the desert, a myth made flesh, bound forever to the sands he had once feared. The days blurred into one another, the line between time and space becoming increasingly indistinct. Ethan could no longer tell if it was the heat, the isolation, or the transformation that had started to warp his perception of reality. His body had changed, and his mind was beginning to follow suit. The scales had spread down his back, his neck, his chest, and his legs. His skin had thickened, turning a dark, mottled green, and his senses were sharper, more attuned to the desert's every sound. The rattles had grown louder, more incessant. The desert itself seemed to be speaking to him. Ethan's reflection in the water he found in the occasional dried-out riverbed was a stranger's face. The man he had been, young, hopeful, and determined, was no longer visible in the glassy surface. Instead, he saw the visage of a creature with glowing eyes, snake-like scales glistening under the harsh sun, and sharp fangs curling from his mouth. His fingers, now adorned with long, twisted claws, dug into the sand when he touched it, like a serpent's tail sweeping the ground. "I'm losing myself," he whispered one night, his voice barely recognizable as his own. His tongue flickered unnaturally between his lips, betraying him in its serpentine movements. He gripped his head as if to hold his sanity together, but it was slipping away. It was too late to turn back. In the silence of the desert night, the rattle came again. It was like a call, a summons, echoing in his mind. He couldn't escape it. His feet moved on their own, as though the desert itself was pulling him toward something. He walked without thinking, following the faint sounds of rattlesnakes in the distance. His body obeyed, his transformation accelerating, and a strange sense of purpose filled him. As he wandered, his mind shifted between clarity and confusion. He could remember fleeting memories, his childhood, the family he had left behind, his desire to uncover the truth about his great-grandfather's lost treasure. But now those thoughts felt distant, like fragments of a life he no longer had any connection to. His true nature was slowly revealing itself. The further Ethan ventured into the desert, the more the land seemed to shift beneath his feet. He was drawn toward something, a deep, ancient pulse that reverberated through the ground. The rattlesnakes, once mere creatures of the desert, now seemed like guardians, guiding him to his fate. Their hissing had grown louder, and their numbers had increased, weaving in and out of the sand like shadows. Then, in the dead of night, as he lay under the oppressive weight of the stars, a voice, low, resonant, and ancient, whispered through his mind, "You are becoming one of us." It wasn't just the transformation that terrified him. It was the realization that the snakes weren't the only ones that lived in the desert. Something else had awakened in him. He could feel it now, deep within his bones. His blood, no longer entirely human, pulsed with the rhythm of the desert. The rattlesnakes weren't just guiding him, they were pulling him into their world, a world where humans no longer had a place. He was no longer just Ethan Walker, the man who had come searching for answers. He was becoming the answer, a part of the myth, an embodiment of the curse that had claimed so many before him. The desert seemed endless, stretching out in every direction, but something glimmered in the distance, a dark silhouette, almost indistinguishable from the horizon. It was a structure, an ancient ruin, its stone walls weathered by centuries of desert winds. His heart beat faster as he realized that it was the place his great-grandfather had mentioned in the old stories, the place where the treasure was supposed to be buried. But it wasn't treasure that awaited him here. It was something far darker, a truth buried deep in the sands. As he approached the ruin, the rattlesnakes gathered around him in greater numbers, hissing louder now, almost as if they were warning him. "Don't go inside," the voice whispered again, louder this time, as if it had come from the very stones of the ruin. "It's not what you think. This is no place for a man." Ethan's feet took him forward, his body moving against his will, his mind consumed by the desire to reach the ruin. He knew, deep down, that the answers lay within, that the curse that had overtaken him would only be understood when he crossed the threshold of the ruin. It was a place where legends were born, where men became myths. The entrance to the ruin was narrow, barely wide enough for him to slip through, but he forced his way inside. The air inside was thick with dust, the scent of ancient stone and earth long forgotten by time. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw something moving in the shadows, a figure, tall and serpentine, standing at the heart of the ruin. The figure was humanoid, but it was twisted, a grotesque blend of human and snake. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its body shimmered with dark scales. It was the embodiment of the curse, the rattlesnake man. "You have come," the figure rasped, its voice low and heavy, like the sound of wind slithering through cracks. "You seek to reverse your fate, but there is no undoing what has been done." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had finally found it, the source of the curse. But instead of the answers he had expected, all he found was an endless cycle of pain, an eternal rebirth that had claimed countless others. The figure in front of him was not just a monster. It was a reflection of everything Ethan had become. The transformation he was undergoing was not just physical. It was a process that stripped away his humanity piece by piece. He had come to the desert seeking treasure, seeking the lost story of his great-grandfather. But now, standing before the rattlesnake man, he understood the true cost of his journey. "You were always meant to find this place," the rattlesnake man said. "Your bloodline is tied to the desert. You are the next in line to walk this path." "No," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to become this." The figure's eyes glowed brighter, and it stepped closer, the air around it crackling with an unnatural energy. "No one chooses. The desert chooses. It takes what it wants, when it wants, and once it has you, you belong to it, forever." The ground trembled beneath his feet, and Ethan's vision blurred. He could feel his body convulsing, his limbs twisting as his transformation accelerated. His mind was slipping away, consumed by the primal instincts of the creature he was becoming. But within the haze of his changing body, a single thought cut through. He had no choice now. The desert had claimed him, and he would walk its sands for all eternity. "I will never be human again, will I?" he asked, his voice a hollow whisper. The rattlesnake man's face twisted into a grotesque smile. "You will never be human again. You are the desert now. You are part of its myth. You will live as one of us, a legend told to scare the souls of those who dare to tread too far." The transformation was complete. Ethan's body, now fully serpent-like, slithered across the desert floor, his scales glistening in the dim moonlight. He was no longer the man who had come here seeking answers. He had become a creature of myth, a terror to all who wandered too far into the desert's heart. The rattlesnake man had been right. Ethan had no place in the world of men. His existence was now a warning, a story told by those who had heard the rattle in the night. He had been reborn, not into a man, but into something far darker, something bound to the desert. As the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon, the rattlesnakes slithered around him, hissing in unison. Ethan, the rattlesnake man, stood tall, his long tail curling beneath him, his glowing eyes scanning the vast, unforgiving desert. And the rattlesnakes followed, as they always had, forever bound to the curse of the land. The desert was silent, save for the low hiss of the wind and the occasional rattle of a distant serpent. Ethan stood motionless, his new body feeling alien beneath him. He could feel the coarse sand beneath his elongated claws, the deep rhythmic pulse of the earth beneath his feet. His senses were heightened in ways that terrified him. Every scent, every sound, every movement felt like it was etched into the very fabric of his being. The moon hung high above, casting an ethereal light over the vast, barren expanse. His body was no longer fully human. The scales that covered his form shimmered with an unnatural glow, and his once human eyes had become slits, flickering with an unsettling green light. His skin, thick and reptilian, was covered in coarse, jagged scales, and his fingers, now like the talons of a bird of prey, dug into the earth with a grotesque sense of possession. The desert had claimed him. He moved slowly, deliberately, slithering rather than walking. Every movement felt natural, like the muscles in his serpentine body were designed for this. The weight of his transformation weighed heavy on his mind, and he felt his humanity slipping further and further away, like water through his fingers. He tried to grasp onto his old self, Ethan Walker, the man who had once been full of ambition and dreams. But the harder he clung to the remnants of his past, the more they slipped away. The wind whispered around him, soft and insistent, but it wasn't just the wind. The desert had its voice, a language beyond the understanding of men. He could feel it in the rattle of every snake, the hiss that echoed in the back of his mind, urging him forward. The sand seemed to speak to him, each grain of sand an ancient whisper, reminding him of his fate. "You cannot escape," the voice whispered to him. It was not his own voice, but something deep and primal, embedded in the desert's soul. The voice wasn't speaking to him through words, but through thoughts, images, sensations. It was the desert speaking directly into his mind. "You are ours now," it continued. "You were chosen, born for this. You belong to the desert. You are a creature of myth, a creature of the earth and stone. No more man, no more weakness." Ethan tried to scream, but the sound that came out of his throat was a low hiss, unnatural and serpentine. His hands, the hands that had once crafted maps and plans, now curled like the claws of a beast. They were no longer hands at all, but weapons designed for a creature that slithered through the underbrush, seeking prey. "No!" Ethan gasped, fighting the overwhelming force that urged him to embrace his new form. "I am human. I was human." But his words were drowned out by the growing rattle, the sound rising around him like the chorus of 1,000 snakes, echoing through the very air itself. The rattlesnakes were everywhere now, slithering in and out of the rocks, their movements like a synchronized dance of death. They were guiding him. They were showing him his path. His once human mind recoiled at the thought of fully embracing his new form. His stomach churned, the human side of him begging for escape. But it was too late. He could feel his humanity slipping further away with each passing moment. He was no longer in control. The further Ethan traveled through the desert, the more his sense of time and reality began to unravel. The days were indistinguishable from one another, each one blending into the next. The sun never seemed to set fully, its harsh light constantly beating down on him, and yet the chill of night came quickly, enveloping him in cold emptiness. There was no reprieve, no rest. The ruin that had once seemed so distant now loomed ahead of him. He couldn't remember how many days he had spent in the wilderness, but he knew one thing with eerie certainty. He was being drawn toward it. The ruin called to him, its ancient stones beckoning him closer with every step. The once distant whisper of the desert had grown louder, more distinct, and now he could hear it speaking directly to him. "You must enter," it said. "You must become the myth. You will lead others into this place just as they led you. It is your fate." As he reached the entrance to the ruin, Ethan felt a strange compulsion to enter. The stone doorway was tall, narrow, almost as though it had been built for someone of his new stature. The ancient glyphs carved into the stone seemed to glow faintly, as if they were alive, pulsing with an energy older than time itself. The desert had its own rules, its own rituals, and it seemed as though they had been set in motion the moment he stepped onto its cursed sands. Ethan entered the ruin with a mixture of dread and inevitability. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were lined with faded murals depicting serpents coiling around human figures, their jaws wide open as they swallowed them whole. It was a warning. He could feel it in his bones. In the center of the room stood a massive stone altar, worn down by centuries of desert storms. It was covered in strange symbols and patterns, none of which he could decipher. But something deep inside him knew what he had to do. His transformation had led him here for a reason. The rattlesnakes that had followed him into the ruin slithered to the altar, their bodies winding around the base as if they were performing a sacred ritual. Ethan stood before them, his body trembling with the realization of what was happening. "You are the chosen one," a voice whispered in his mind again, louder this time. It was the voice of the desert, and it spoke to him like an ancient deity. "You are the rebirth of the rattlesnake man, the one who has come to claim the curse, to become the keeper of the desert's secrets." Ethan's heart raced, his thoughts fragmented. The pull of the desert was undeniable. It had consumed him, and now he was ready to accept his place within it. His hands, now more like the claws of a serpent than a man's, reached out to touch the altar. As soon as his fingers brushed the stone, an explosion of heat and energy surged through his body. The scales on his body seemed to pulse with life, and his senses were overwhelmed by the intense power that flooded through him. Pain shot through him like a bolt of lightning. His body twisted in unnatural ways as his mind seemed to splinter, the human side of him fighting to remain. But the creature inside him was too strong. It took over completely. His bones cracked, his spine shifted, and his throat filled with the hiss of 1,000 serpents. The desert had claimed him fully. Ethan's transformation was complete. No longer was he Ethan Walker, the man who had come seeking answers. He was now something far darker, something woven into the very fabric of the desert itself, the rattlesnake man. His body was no longer entirely human. He was a creature of myth, a being of scales and venom, born from the sands and cursed by the land. His eyes glowed with a faint, eerie green light, and his tongue flicked from his mouth like a serpent tasting the air. He looked around the ruin, his senses heightened to an unimaginable degree. The rattlesnakes that surrounded him no longer seemed like mere creatures of the earth. They were his kin, his companions, and together they were the guardians of this sacred place. But Ethan's mind, what little of it remained, could still remember the man he had been, the man who had once had hopes and dreams. His humanity still fought against the curse, but it was a losing battle. He was bound to the desert now, a living legend. The transformation was irreversible, and there would be no going back. As he stepped out into the desert, the night air cool against his scales, he felt the weight of the curse settle over him. The rattlesnakes, his followers, moved alongside him, their bodies winding through the sand like living shadows. The rattlesnake man was reborn, and his legend would echo through the desert for centuries to come. And the rattlesnakes, the desert's true children, would forever be his voice, his warning to those who dared venture too far into the heart of the land. Days or perhaps weeks passed in an endless cycle. The sun never set fully, and the moon never rose high enough to offer anything but faint, fleeting light. The desert was indifferent to Ethan's suffering. It was as though time had forgotten him entirely. His once human mind could barely comprehend the passage of time. The wind whispered, a constant companion, but its words had become meaningless. Ethan, or what had become of him, wandered the vast desert with no direction, no purpose other than the endless hiss of his own transformation. His body, sleek and serpentine, was both an abomination and a masterpiece of nature. The scales that covered him now gleamed like dark emeralds in the light of the eternal twilight, each one vibrating slightly, attuned to the energy of the earth beneath him. The rattlesnakes had never left his side. They moved with him, swarming around him in a formation that bordered on worship. They followed his every movement, their rattles sounding like a strange chorus in the distance. The creatures that had once been nothing more than a symbol of fear had become his family, his only companions. They were as bound to the desert as he was, and in their hiss, he found both a strange comfort and a sickening reminder of what he had become. It wasn't just the transformation of his body that haunted him. It was the slow, creeping loss of his identity. He couldn't remember his family's faces anymore, nor the sound of his own voice before the change. What had once been familiar His hands, his feet, was now unfamiliar and grotesque. The craving for flesh, the need to hunt, had taken hold of him. At night, the hunger would gnaw at him, urging him to feed. He remembered the feeling of hunger from his human days, but this was something more, something primal, something he couldn't control. The desert had awakened this part of him, and it was insatiable. It wasn't just for food anymore. It was for power, for the sense of being part of something far older, far stronger than he could ever comprehend. Sometimes, in the eerie silence of the night, Ethan would hear the wind howling and feel a distant presence, a looming figure, watching, waiting, as if the desert itself was aware of his every step. He often wondered if the desert had a will of its own, a mind that controlled everything within its vast reaches. Perhaps, like him, the desert was a being of myth, a creature of legend. But no answers came, only silence. Only rattlesnakes. Ethan's transformation, while excruciating and nearly unbearable, eventually reached a point of stasis. No longer was he in the throes of change. His new form was solidified. But that didn't bring relief. He had become a part of the desert, a part of the myth. But that knowledge did little to assuage the gnawing hunger, the unrelenting thirst for something he could not name. His mind, once so sharp and driven, was clouded by a haze of dark thoughts. There were moments when he felt his humanity pushing through the cracks, desperate to escape, but those moments were brief, fleeting. He was more a creature of instinct now, driven by a power older than himself. One evening, as the stars blinked out above him and the winds began to shift, a strange sensation overcame him. The rattlesnakes around him were restless, their hissing louder than it had ever been before. The earth beneath his feet seemed to vibrate, a deep hum that pulsed through his entire being. It was as if the desert itself had come alive, speaking through the rattlesnakes and the sand. Then, from the depths of the dark horizon, something stirred. A shape, towering and ancient, emerged from the shadows. Ethan could feel it before he saw it. The presence of something immense, something that called to him, deeper than anything he had ever known. His eyes, now glowing with an eerie green light, focused on the figure as it approached. At first it was just a shadow, but as it drew closer, Ethan could see the creature clearly. It was like him, but not quite. It had the form of a human, but its body was much larger, much more serpentine. Its skin was a dark, glistening black, covered in scales that shimmered like obsidian. Its eyes glowed a brilliant yellow, and its rattle, larger and more menacing than any other, sounded with a deep, resonating rattle. The creature moved toward him, its every step shaking the ground beneath them. It was the Rattlesnake King, a legend older than the desert itself, a being who had once been a human but had transcended that existence, becoming something far greater, far darker. "You have come far, young one," the Rattlesnake King hissed, its voice vibrating through the very air. "You are no longer man, no longer beast. You are the embodiment of the desert, and now you are ready." Ethan's heart pounded. Was this it? Was this his final test? Had he been brought here to learn his true purpose? The king's words resonated in his bones. I don't understand," Ethan muttered, though his voice was barely recognizable, raspy and laced with the hiss of the creature he had become. "What do you want from me?" The Rattlesnake King tilted its head, eyes gleaming with something like pity. "Want? Nothing. But you are not the first to walk this path. You are not the first to succumb to the desert's power. There have been many before you, many like you, who thought they could defy their fate. But now you see, you have no choice. You will lead the others. Others? Ethan asked, confusion creeping into his voice. What others? The Rattlesnake King stepped closer, its massive form towering over him. The king's rattle sounded once more, a deep resonant note that seemed to echo through the entire desert. The others who are yet to come, the ones who will hear the call. You are not alone in your curse. The desert has a way of bringing its children together. The Rattlesnake Man cannot walk alone. He must gather the lost, the cursed, and you will guide them. Ethan felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had thought that his fate had been sealed, that he was the only one to bear the burden of this curse. But now, he realized with a sickening clarity that the desert would never release him. It had plans for him, plans he could not escape. He was not just a monster of myth. He was the leader of a new generation of cursed beings. I don't want this, Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. I never asked for this. The Rattlesnake King looked down at him, its eyes glowing brighter. It is too late for that. You were chosen, just as I was, just as all who walk this path are. The desert has claimed you, and now you will claim it in return. Ethan's heart thudded painfully in his chest. The weight of the curse, the weight of his transformation pressed down on him. But now he understood the true nature of what he had become. He was a keeper of the desert, a leader of serpents, a creature of myth, and as long as the desert existed, so would he. The Rattlesnake King turned its gaze toward the horizon. The wind shifted again, and the rattlesnakes around Ethan seemed to stiffen, their hisses growing more intense. You must walk the sands, seek those who are lost, those who are still human enough to hear the call. Bring them into the fold of the desert, for there will be many more like you, and the desert grows stronger with each one. Ethan stood motionless, his new form heavy with the weight of his purpose. He was no longer a man, no longer human in the way he had once known. He was the Rattlesnake Man, and he would lead others like him into the heart of the desert. Together, they would become the legends that others would fear. The rattlesnakes slithered around him, their hissing chorus growing louder. The desert had claimed him, and now it would claim others. And the rattles would never cease. The call would never end. The wind began to howl again, its voice now an almost palpable force that seemed to resonate with the very core of Ethan's being. His once human heart pounded in his chest as the Rattlesnake King's words echoed in his mind. You must walk the sands, seek those who are lost. There was no escaping the call now. The curse was too deeply ingrained, too inescapable. But despite the terror that racked his mind, a part of him couldn't help but feel a strange surge of power. The realization hit him all at once. He was no longer a man in the traditional sense, but something ancient, something that belonged to the desert. His body, long and sinuous like that of a serpent, seemed to hum with unnatural energy. The muscles of his new form moved without conscious effort. His claws, now as sharp as obsidian, dug into the sand with ease. The rattlesnakes surrounding him seemed to bow in reverence as if recognizing their king. You cannot resist this, the Rattlesnake King hissed, its voice deep and resonant, filling the air around them. The desert has claimed you. Your soul is bound to it. You are now the guardian of its secrets and its terrors." Ethan recoiled, but only for a moment. His eyes, those once human eyes, glowed faintly in the dark, the bright green of a predator's gaze. And for the first time he understood. The desert was more than a landscape. It was alive, and he was part of it. He tried to speak, but the sound that emerged was a low, guttural hiss, a noise so alien to his own ears that it made his stomach twist. He was far from the man he had been. No trace of the human Ethan remained, at least not in the way he remembered. His mind still clung to memories, fleeting ones, of a time before the desert, but they were slipping through his fingers like water. "The rattlesnake man is not bound by time," the rattlesnake king intoned. "You will never grow old. You will never die. You will exist as long as the desert stands. And when the desert calls, others will come." Ethan struggled against the weight of those words, but deep down, he felt the truth in them. The desert's call was a part of him now. He couldn't outrun it. He couldn't hide from it. His senses grew sharper, more acute. The rustle of a snake in the sand, the faintest tremor in the earth. Everything around him seemed amplified. The night was alive with movement, with whispers, with the language of the land that had claimed him. He could feel the pulse of the desert, its heart beating in rhythm with his own. "There is no going back," the rattlesnake king's voice boomed. "But there is power in acceptance." Ethan's throat tightened as the weight of what had happened to him pressed down on him. His skin, thick and slick with scales, seemed to quiver with every breath he took. He could feel the curse tightening its grip, wrapping itself around him like a coil, like a snake preparing to strike. "What is it that you want me to do?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, his mind fighting against the overwhelming truth that had settled in his chest. "What is my purpose?" The rattlesnake king regarded him with a look of something between pity and reverence. "You must gather them," it said, its voice low and commanding. "The lost ones, the ones who wander, the ones who listen to the rattle in the wind. They are coming, Ethan, just as you came." A sickening realization gripped Ethan's heart, the weight of his curse becoming all too clear. The rattlesnake king wasn't simply guiding him, it was training him, preparing him to lead those who would follow in his footsteps, those who would hear the call of the desert. They would be cursed, like him, and together they would become a new force in the world. He was to become the leader of an army of serpents, an army of cursed souls bound forever to the desert. Ethan's mind reeled. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd felt like a human being. His thoughts, once full of ambition, of plans and hopes, had become distant memories, slipping away as quickly as they had formed. The desert's grip on him was tightening, but there was nothing he could do. The very earth beneath him felt like a living thing, pulling him deeper into the sands, pulling him toward his fate. And then, as the rattlesnake king slithered away into the darkness, a new sound entered the air. It was distant at first, a low rumbling sound that grew louder with each passing moment. Ethan paused, listening intently. The rattlesnakes around him grew still, their bodies curling tightly, as if they too could sense the change in the air. The wind began to shift, carrying with it the scent of something unfamiliar, a faint acrid odor, something that felt both alien and familiar. Ethan's senses, heightened by his new form, caught it. Another presence, a disturbance in the natural order. His heart, if it could still be called that, raced as the ground beneath him trembled. Something was coming. Out of the darkness, a figure emerged. A man, barely visible against the moonlight, his form silhouetted by the pale glow. He stumbled forward, dragging his feet as though in a trance. Ethan's instincts kicked in. His claws flexed, his body coiling like a snake prepared to strike. The rattlesnakes surrounding him stirred, their bodies moving as if they too were anticipating the encounter. The man stumbled forward, his eyes wide with fear. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt and hollow from exhaustion. Sweat clung to his brow, and his body seemed to shake with fear, with some unspoken terror that Ethan could not understand. The man's eyes locked onto Ethan's, and for a brief moment, they seemed to recognize something in him. A shared fear, a shared curse. And then, as if on instinct, the man's mouth opened. "Please." His voice was broken, raspy, barely a whisper. "Help me. I don't know where I am." Ethan froze, the sound of the man's plea washing over him like a flood of memories. The desperation, the hopelessness, it was so familiar. It was like hearing his own voice echoing back at him. And for the first time since his transformation, a flicker of something human stirred within him. A trace of the man he had once been. The man stepped forward again, but this time, Ethan's claws twitched involuntarily. A deep rattle filled the air, a warning. The rattlesnakes hissed, their bodies swarming to the sides as the man's fear became palpable. I'm sorry." The man's voice faltered. "Please, just tell me what's happening." Ethan felt a chill run through his body, a deep sense of foreboding that had nothing to do with the man's fear. He felt it then, the call of the desert stronger than ever urging him to act. He wasn't here to help. He wasn't here to save anyone. He was here to lead, to claim more souls for the desert, to fulfill his role as the rattlesnake man. Without warning, his body surged forward. The man barely had time to scream before Ethan's claws sank into his flesh, the sharpness of his talons cutting through the air like a serpent's strike. The man's body went limp in his grasp, and Ethan, almost reluctantly, dragged him into the sands. The rattlesnakes, sensing their king's action, moved swiftly to surround the body, their serpentine forms quickly consuming it. And as the wind howled louder, the faint sound of rattles reverberated through the night air, echoing through the desert, a warning to all those who dared to enter. As the days and weeks blurred together, Ethan felt the pull of the desert growing stronger, more insistent. Each night, as the moon rose high above, more lost souls appeared. Some wandered aimlessly, unaware of the curse that would soon claim them. Others came with desperation, seeking something they couldn't name, answers, safety, a way out. But there was no escape from the desert. Once the rattlesnakes had marked them, once they heard the rattle, their fates were sealed. Ethan no longer questioned it. He had no choice but to obey the call. The desert had claimed him, and now he would claim others. The myth of the rattlesnake man had come to life, and its legend would grow with every soul he gathered. The desert was eternal, and so too would be Ethan's curse. As the days dragged on, Ethan's form became more attuned to the desert's rhythm. The air hummed with the same eerie melody, the rattle of the serpents now an integral part of his own heartbeat. He had long lost the desire to resist. The desert's influence was absolute, its power woven into his very soul. It was as if every grain of sand, Every gust of wind, every whisper in the dark spoke directly to him. There was no turning back now. Ethan no longer wondered about his past. The memories of a life before the desert were fading, becoming shadows that couldn't hold the same weight. What remained was the desert, vast, endless, and all-consuming. He was no longer bound by the fragile concept of time. To him, the sun and moon had become irrelevant. All that mattered was the endless call of the rattlesnakes, the hiss in the air, the shifting of sand beneath his feet. As the rattlesnake man, he had become something far beyond a mere leader. He was the embodiment of the desert itself. He was the serpent, the eternal predator, and the keeper of the lost. His eyes, glowing with an unsettling green hue, scanned the horizon for his next prey. At night, the desert seemed to stir with life, though it was a life that existed in silence. The rattlesnakes appeared, slithering out from the cracks in the earth, rising from beneath the sand. They were drawn to him, as if they too could sense the great shift that had taken place. The desert was alive with a sense of waiting. Then, on one of these nights, Ethan felt it, a ripple in the air, a presence that was unfamiliar. He turned, the sand shifting beneath his feet. The rattlesnakes hissed and recoiled as if they too felt the same disturbance. His eyes narrowed, scanning the shifting darkness. A figure appeared on the horizon, moving slowly, deliberately. The wind stirred around them, but their steps were unhurried. Ethan's pulse quickened, his senses alert. This was not like the others. The figure drew closer, and Ethan could see the silhouette of a woman. Her dark hair whipped around her face, tangled by the wind. Her clothes, tattered and worn, clung to her like a second skin. But it was her eyes that made Ethan pause. They were wide and filled with an unnerving mixture of fear and defiance. Eyes that had seen something beyond the desert, something that should not have been. She stepped forward, unafraid, her gaze fixed on Ethan. "You are him, aren't you?" Her voice was clear, sharp against the stillness of the desert night. The rattlesnake man. Ethan's heart, if it could still be called that, stilled. The sound of rattles grew louder, and the snake slithered closer, drawn to the stranger as if sensing the tension in the air. The woman didn't flinch. "You can feel it, can't you? The way the desert calls to you, the way it calls to all of us." Ethan's eyes narrowed. She had already figured it out. She knew what he had become. "I was once like you," she continued, stepping forward once more. "But I resisted. I fought against the desert's pull. I thought I could escape." Ethan's sharp eyes watched her closely, his form coiled, ready to strike if necessary. But something about her presence intrigued him. Her scent, something faintly familiar, like the scent of old rain, had a strange connection to his own memories. But what memories? The thought was fleeting. "Why are you here?" he hissed, the sound of it curling around his words. His claws flexed at his side, ready to tear into her flesh if she posed a threat. The woman's lips parted in a half-smile, though it was devoid of warmth. "You're not the only one the desert has claimed. There are others who hear the call, who are drawn to the sands. The curse. It is far older than you think." Ethan tilted his head, his senses now sharp. The air felt thick with anticipation. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice now more like the hiss of a snake than the words of a man. She stepped closer, her feet sinking into the sand. The rattlesnakes hissed in protest but did not strike. There was something about her, something that made them pause, something ancient, something powerful. "I came to warn you," she said, her voice now low, laden with a deep understanding. "The desert is not what you think it is. You've become part of it, yes, but it has plans for you. It is not just a place, it is a force, and it is waiting for the right moment to claim everything." Ethan's eyes flared with anger. "I don't need your warnings. The desert is mine now. I am its king." The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she shook her head slowly as if pitying him. "You think you control it, but you're wrong. The desert controls you." For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, the desert's presence around him becoming heavier, more oppressive. There was a tension in the air now, as if the very sands were holding their breath. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, his voice now tinged with doubt. The woman's lips twitched in a knowing smile. "Because the desert doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about anyone. It doesn't even care about the myths you've become. It only cares about what it needs." The rattlesnakes swarmed around her feet, but she remained unfazed. Ethan watched them carefully. There was something about her. She wasn't like the others he had encountered. She didn't fear him. She wasn't afraid of the curse. And then, as if sensing something, the woman's gaze turned toward the horizon, where the faint outline of a storm was beginning to take shape. The sky had shifted, darkening, as if something massive was about to unfold. "The storm is coming," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "And when it does, the desert will awaken in ways you cannot understand." Ethan's chest tightened. He felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing him towards the storm. It was the desert calling to him. But this wasn't just a call. It was something deeper, something darker. "I must go," the woman said, her voice suddenly more urgent. "You need to be ready. The storm will not pass quietly." She turned and began to walk away, her footsteps light against the sand. Ethan's mind raced as he watched her retreating figure. There was something she was leaving unsaid, something important, but he couldn't make himself move to stop her. The storm. It was calling him. The storm that the woman had warned him about arrived faster than Ethan had expected. Dark clouds gathered above, swirling in an unnatural pattern, as if the very heavens themselves were being manipulated by some malevolent force. The desert, once quiet and still, seemed to awaken with an intensity that shook the earth beneath Ethan's feet. The rattlesnakes hissed furiously, their rattles sounding a warning as the wind began to whip around him. The air felt thick with anticipation. The desert was shifting. Ethan's claws dug into the sand, his senses heightened. He could feel the pull of the storm, a force far greater than he had ever experienced. This wasn't just a natural storm, it was something else, something dark and powerful, a force that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. And then, as if on cue, the sky split open with a deafening roar. Lightning crackled through the air, illuminating the desert for a brief, blinding moment. The rattlesnakes hissed louder, their bodies coiling in agitation as if they knew what was coming. A deep rumble echoed through the ground. The desert was no longer a place. It was becoming a living, breathing entity, and it was alive with rage. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. The storm. It was not just a storm, it was a herald, a sign. The desert was calling him to its heart. The storm raged overhead, a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the sky. Ethan stood motionless, feeling the power of the desert surge through him. The air was thick with an almost tangible pressure, and the rattlesnakes surrounding him hissed in unison, their bodies writhing restlessly in the shifting sands. The woman's warning echoed in his mind. The desert controls you, not the other way around. His claws dug into the sand, the sharpness of them a reminder of how far he had come from the man he used to be. He could feel the change inside him, the power of the desert flowing through his veins, coursing through the very marrow of his bones. He had become part of it, but now something had shifted. The storm was not just a natural occurrence. It was a manifestation of something ancient, something far beyond his understanding. As the wind howled, whipping the sand into a frenzy, Ethan felt the desert itself breathe around him, its exhalation like a low growl of warning. The rattlesnakes, sensing the change, began to retreat into the cracks and crevices of the desert, as if obeying an ancient command. Even the earth beneath Ethan's feet seemed to tremble, responding to the storm's approach. The winds howled like the voices of the damned, an endless wailing cry that resonated deep within him. Then, in the midst of the chaos, a shape emerged from the storm. A massive figure, impossibly tall and looming, stepped from the swirling darkness. It was like a shadow made flesh, its form shifting and undulating, as if it were made of the storm itself. The air crackled with an energy so thick that it felt as if the very atmosphere were alive. Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. This was no ordinary being. It was a creature born of the desert's deepest secrets, a guardian of the land, perhaps even older than the rattlesnake king itself. The creature's eyes gleamed with a fierce, otherworldly light, glowing like molten gold in the darkness. Its body seemed to ripple and twist, serpentine in nature, but far larger and more terrifying than any creature Ethan had ever seen. Its presence alone radiated ancient power, a force of nature that seemed to transcend everything Ethan had known. "You have come." The creature's voice was like the rumble of distant thunder, deep and resonant, shaking the very air around them. "The one who walks the path of the serpent." Ethan's heart thudded heavily in his chest, but something deep within him stirred, a feeling of recognition, an echo of the curse that had taken root inside him. "I am the rattlesnake man," Ethan said, his voice filled with the hiss of a serpent. His words were not entirely his own. The desert's power flowed through him, and with it came an undeniable authority. The creature let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a growl, the sound rolling over the desert like thunder. "Yes, you are, but that is only a part of the truth." It stepped closer, its massive body shifting like smoke, folding in on itself. "You have become the king of snakes, but you are not the ruler of the desert. Not yet. Not until you understand the truth of your curse." Ethan recoiled, his instincts urging him to strike, to defend his new identity. But the creature's presence was overwhelming, and something deep inside him, a fragment of his former self, held him back. "The curse?" Ethan asked, his voice laced with both defiance and uncertainty. "I was chosen. The desert calls to me. I am the one who will lead the lost souls." The creature's golden eyes gleamed even brighter, its form rippling with the power of the storm. "You think the desert chose you? Foolish mortal. The desert uses you. It always has, and it always will. It is not a land to be ruled. It is a force. It is the embodiment of something far older than your kind." The air around them crackled with energy, the winds growing louder, more intense, as if the very storm had a voice of its own. The rattlesnakes retreated even further, their hissing growing more frantic as the desert's power became overwhelming. Ethan's claws dug into the sand, his body tense, his mind racing. "What are you telling me?" he demanded, his voice rising above the roar of the storm. "I've been marked by this land. I've become one with it. I will not be its servant." The creature's gaze softened, though there was no pity in its eyes, only a deep understanding. "You have become part of the desert, yes, but you are also its prisoner. You are not the first to be drawn to it, and you will not be the last. But if you wish to understand your true role, you must follow me." For a moment, Ethan was torn. The power that surged within him, the same power that had once given him confidence, was now a prison, a chain that kept him tethered to the desert's will. He had always believed that he was the master of his fate, that he had been chosen to rule. But now, the truth was becoming clear. He was not the ruler of the desert. He was simply another pawn in a much older game. Reluctantly, Ethan nodded. "Show me." The creature led Ethan deeper into the heart of the storm, and the desert around them seemed to change with every step. The once familiar sand now appeared to be alive, shifting and pulsating beneath their feet, as though the earth itself were breathing. The storm raged on, but within its center, an eerie stillness had settled, like a calm before the true chaos. They descended into a cavern, a yawning chasm in the earth that seemed to lead into the very depths of the desert. The walls of the cavern shimmered with an iridescent glow, as if the stone itself were alive with the power of the land. Strange symbols, ancient and indecipherable, were etched into the walls, their meanings lost to time. "The desert is not just a place," the creature intoned, its voice echoing off the cavern walls. "It is a living entity, a force that predates the world you know. It is older than civilization, older than any gods or myths." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would break the illusion of safety within the cavern. "The desert is the prison of an ancient power, a force that once ruled all lands. It was bound here long ago, cast into the desert by those who feared it. The curse that now resides in you, it is not just the mark of the rattlesnake man. It is the mark of the desert's will. You have been chosen, yes, but not as a ruler. You are the vessel, the keeper of what is bound beneath the sands." Ethan's heart began to race as the enormity of the creature's words sank in. His transformation had not been a gift. It was a curse, a prison. He had been marked not as the king of the desert, but as its servant, its jailer. "This power," Ethan whispered, "it's contained here, beneath the desert, isn't it?" The creature nodded. "Yes, and now it is waking. You must decide, Rattlesnake Man. Will you continue to serve the desert, to become its agent in the world? Or will you seek to free yourself from its grip?" Ethan's body shuddered. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. He had been drawn to the desert, had embraced the curse, believing it to be his destiny. But now, the truth had become clear. The desert was not a kingdom to be ruled. It was a force that used its followers, drawing them in like prey. The storm outside raged louder, the winds howling in fury. Inside the cavern, the air grew thick with tension, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. Ethan had come to the desert to find power, to embrace his new form. But now, he had to choose whether to continue his servitude or to defy the desert's will and fight for his freedom. The storm outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his answer. Ethan stood motionless in the heart of the cavern, the air around him growing heavy with anticipation. The creature loomed before him, its golden eyes piercing into his very soul. The cavern seemed to stretch on forever, the stone walls pulsating with the power of the desert, as if the very earth was alive and aware of his indecision. The wind outside had begun to die down, but the storm's wrath was still tangible in the air, like the final moments before a great thunderclap. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps, his senses overwhelmed by the suffocating presence of the desert's power. He could feel it now, the weight of the curse pressing in on him. The desert had not chosen him as its king. It had simply claimed him, used him as a vessel for its will. His transformation had not been an elevation, but a descent. He was not its master. He was its servant. "Free yourself, rattlesnake man," the creature said, its voice softer now, almost coaxing. "You are bound to this land, but you do not have to accept your fate. The desert will not show mercy, but it is not beyond your power to break free." The temptation was overwhelming. Freedom, true freedom, was within his reach. Ethan had thought he was beyond the grasp of human concerns, beyond the pull of time and mortality. But now, standing in the depths of the desert, surrounded by the ancient force that had transformed him, he realized just how fragile his sense of control had been all along. What if I can break free? The thought was fleeting, but it took root. The creature seemed to sense his hesitation. The desert will not be kind to those who try to escape it. It will fight you and it will twist you, but you are not alone in your struggle. Ethan's claws flexed, the tips scraping against the stone beneath him. The weight of his decision hung heavy on his heart. The rattlesnakes outside had all but vanished into the storm, retreating into the depths of the earth. He could hear their hissing now, distant, like the voices of the damned, urging him to take the path of least resistance. But there was something else, something inside him that still burned with defiance. What am I now? The question echoed in his mind. "You are the keeper of the desert," the creature intoned, "the guardian of its power. But you can choose to be more than that. You are not the first to hear the call of the serpents, nor will you be the last. But you are the one who can break the cycle." The words echoed in Ethan's mind. The cycle. The desert's endless pull, the transformation of men into creatures of myth, the curse that consumed them all. He had thought he was unique, that he had been chosen, but now he understood. He was just another soul lost to the desert's will, another pawn in an endless game. A cold chill ran through his body, the familiar pain of his transformation flaring up once more. His skin itched, and he could feel the serpentine scales beneath the surface, as if they were trying to break free. The curse was never going to let him go, not unless he fought it with every ounce of strength he had left. The creature took a step closer, its presence overwhelming. "You were not meant to become a god, rattlesnake man. You were meant to become a legend, but legends fade. They are forgotten, and the desert remains." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "If I am a legend, then I will carve my own fate." The creature's golden eyes flickered with what could have been a trace of amusement. "And what will you do when the desert calls to you again, when the hunger returns?" Ethan's pulse quickened. When the hunger returns. The rattlesnakes, the creatures that had once followed him like loyal soldiers, were not his allies. They were the embodiment of the desert's hunger, the desire for control, the need to consume. They were the ones who called to him, urging him to embrace the curse and become one with the land. But he wasn't sure he could fight it anymore. The very air in the cavern seemed to press in on him, urging him to bow to the desert's will. The creature's voice cut through his thoughts. "The choice is yours, but know this. If you choose to walk away, if you choose to escape your fate, the desert will not let you leave. It will take from you everything you hold dear, and it will make you wish for the curse again." Ethan clenched his fists. The weight of the creature's words struck him like a blow, but he refused to let it crush him. The desert had claimed him, yes, but that didn't mean he had to surrender completely. He was still him, wasn't he? Still Ethan, the man who had once walked among men, who had dreams and desires that went beyond the sand. "I have to try. I have to fight. I will not be your prisoner," Ethan said, his voice trembling with both fear and resolve. "I will not be bound by this curse." The creature tilted its head, its golden eyes narrowing. "You misunderstand. You are already bound." Ethan's claws scraped against the stone, and in that moment, something inside him snapped. The desert's power surged, threatening to drown him in its hunger, but he fought it with every shred of will he had. The storm outside had faded, but the battle was far from over. The true storm, the battle for his soul, was just beginning. The creature loomed before him, silent for a long moment. Its golden eyes flickered, as if measuring Ethan's resolve. The wind had died down, leaving only the soft whisper of sand shifting in the distance. "You cannot escape the desert," it said, its voice now softer, almost sad. "It is not just a place, it is a part of you, and no matter how far you run, it will always follow." Ethan's breath was ragged, his body trembling from the strain of resisting the curse that surged within him. The scales on his skin itched, flaring up in painful patches that made him wince with each movement. But he held his ground, feeling the power of the desert swirling around him, pulling at him, trying to drag him back into its grip. "I don't care," he snarled, his voice now filled with the unmistakable hiss of a serpent. "I will not be a slave to this land. I will not be its keeper." The creature's eyes widened slightly, but it made no move to stop him. Ethan's claws dug deeper into the stone, his entire body straining against the pressure, against the ancient force that sought to consume him. The scales on his body shifted, writhing beneath his skin, but he didn't falter. "I choose freedom," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "Even if it means tearing myself apart. I will not be your legend. I will not be your prison." The creature seemed to pause, as if considering Ethan's words. The cavern grew still, the oppressive weight of the desert's power pressing down on them both. And then, with a final, almost imperceptible shift, the creature stepped back, its golden eyes watching Ethan with an unreadable expression. "The desert will not forget your choice," it said softly, "but perhaps neither will you." Ethan turned and began to walk away, his steps heavy but purposeful. The cavern, once filled with the sound of his struggles, now fell into an eerie silence. The storm had passed, and the air felt lighter, as though the very world around him was holding its breath. He was free, for now. But as he walked, a voice echoed in his mind, a whisper that chilled him to the bone. "The desert will never forget you." The words were a warning, but they were also a reminder. Ethan had made his choice, but the desert's curse was far from finished with him. It would follow him, whispering in the wind, calling to him in the rattle of serpents, and no matter where he went, no matter how far he ran, the desert would always be waiting. Ethan walked through the cavern, his every step heavy with the weight of his choice. The stone beneath his feet seemed to pulse with the energy of the desert, as though the earth itself was trying to drag him back. The scales on his skin burned, and with each breath he could feel the desert's presence growing stronger, reaching out for him with an almost palpable hunger. The air grew colder the further he walked, the once warm winds of the desert now replaced with a biting chill. It was as if the land itself resented his defiance. His heart raced, and he felt a gnawing emptiness deep inside, a hunger that was not entirely his own. "It's the curse," he thought bitterly. "The desert's hunger has rooted itself deep inside me." His claws scraped against the stone as he walked, the familiar hissing sound of his breath still there, a constant reminder of his transformation. His body was no longer his own. It had become a grotesque mockery of a man, part human, part serpent. He could still feel the slithering movement beneath his skin, the scales that were slowly turning him into something other, something monstrous. But he refused to give in. He had made his choice. He would not allow the desert to claim him. As he reached the end of the cavern, the ground began to shake, a low rumble echoing through the walls. The air grew thick with the smell of dust and decay, and Ethan felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. He wasn't alone. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. They were like him, creatures of the desert, twisted and deformed by the curse. Their bodies were covered in serpentine scales, their eyes glowing with the same golden hue that Ethan had seen in the creature that had guided him. They were the lost souls, the ones who had fallen prey to the desert's hunger. Their bodies were contorted, their forms barely human, and their movements were sluggish, as if the desert had drained them of their will. But their eyes, those glowing, pitiless eyes, were fixed on Ethan, as though they could see into the very heart of his soul. "You can't escape." The voice was a whisper, but it was sharp, like the rattle of a snake's tail. One of the figures stepped forward, its body shifting with a sickening crack, as if its bones were made of brittle stone. Ethan took a step back, his claws digging into the stone floor as his heart raced. "I'm not like you," he spat, his voice a low hiss. "I won't become one of you." The figure's mouth stretched into a grin, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "You already are one of us," it said, its voice filled with cruel amusement. "The desert doesn't care about your resistance. It owns you, just as it owns us." Ethan's pulse quickened. The desert's influence was growing stronger, wrapping around him like a suffocating coil. He could feel the hunger, the power of the desert calling to him, urging him to give in, to accept his fate. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. The creature advanced, and the others followed, their movements slow but deliberate. They were circling him, closing in, like wolves surrounding their prey. "You can't fight the desert," another one hissed. It's too old, too powerful. It is the earth beneath your feet. It is the air in your lungs. It is in the very blood that flows through you now. The moment you accepted its mark, you sealed your fate. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. They were right. He had been marked. The curse had taken root in him, and every step he took was a reminder of how far he had fallen from the man he once was. But the fire inside him burned brighter than ever. He had made a choice. He would not be a slave to this land. He would fight. "I will not be controlled by you." Ethan snarled, his voice filled with venom. His body trembled with the force of his will, and he could feel the power of the desert rising within him, thrumming in his veins like a living thing. He reached into the depths of his soul, drawing on the last shred of his humanity. The curse was a part of him, but it did not define him. With a roar, he extended his claws and slashed through the air. The serpentine figures recoiled, hissing in pain, but they did not back down. The desert's power surged within Ethan, and he could feel it twisting his body, changing him even more, but he pushed it back, forced it to bend to his will. "I will break free," he growled, his eyes burning with defiance. "I will not become a legend for you to feast on." The creatures hissed, retreating into the shadows as the cavern trembled around them. The desert's power surged around Ethan, its hunger growing louder, but he stood firm, refusing to let it claim him. For the first time since his transformation, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. Ethan's heart raced as the desert's power seemed to swell, building into a storm that threatened to consume him. The ground beneath him shook, and the cavern began to crumble, the walls cracking as the very earth seemed to recoil from his defiance. "The desert is alive," he thought, his mind racing. "It is trying to swallow me whole." The scales on his body burned, each movement feeling like fire. He could feel the desert's hunger gnawing at him, pulling him closer to the edge of surrender. His claws trembled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But still, he fought. The rattling of the serpents, his own kind, echoed in his ears, a constant reminder of what he had become. The desert's power was inescapable. It was part of him now. It was in his blood, in his bones. But it didn't have to be who he was. He looked up as the cavern continued to collapse around him, the dust rising like a thick fog. The figures of the lost souls were gone, but their whispers still lingered, their words echoing in his mind. "You cannot escape. You will become like us. The desert always claims what it desires." "No," Ethan whispered to himself. "I am free." With a final desperate effort, Ethan reached into the deepest corners of his soul, drawing on the last of his willpower. He felt the desert's power surge within him, pulling at his mind, trying to bend him, break him. But he stood firm, feeling the power of his choice flow through him. He would not surrender. The ground beneath him cracked open, a deep chasm forming in the earth as the desert tried to pull him into its depths. But Ethan raised his arms, the air around him crackling with the energy of the storm. "I will not be your prisoner," he roared. With a final explosive burst of energy, Ethan unleashed his will against the desert, breaking through the oppressive grip of its power. The cavern trembled one last time before collapsing entirely, the earth splitting beneath him as he was thrust into the unknown. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was no longer in the cavern. The desert stretched out before him, vast and unrelenting. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sand. He was free, but the freedom came with a price. The desert's power still coursed through him, its hunger still clawing at his soul. He could feel the weight of the curse, the rattlesnake man, pressing against him, trying to reclaim him. But for now, he was free. He had broken the cycle. The storm had passed, but the desert would never forget him, and neither would he forget the desert. With a final glance over his shoulder, Ethan turned and walked into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. His footsteps were silent, his heart heavy, but there was something new in his gaze. He had escaped the desert, but it was still a part of him, and perhaps someday the desert would call again. Ethan's feet sank into the hot desert sands with each step, the dry earth burning through his bare claws, but he didn't feel it. His body, a grotesque fusion of man and serpent, felt every shift, every movement of the land beneath him. The scales that covered his skin glistened in the fading light, a stark contrast against the endless stretches of desolation around him. Despite his newfound freedom, the weight of the desert was inescapable, a shadow that hung over him, always lurking at the edges of his consciousness. The wind had died down, leaving only an eerie silence, broken occasionally by the distant rustle of sand. He had no destination, just a nagging, inexplicable pull to keep moving forward. He wasn't sure how long he had been walking. Hours, days. Time had become irrelevant to him now, consumed by the curse that still beat within his chest like a second heartbeat. The desert had left its mark on him, and no matter how far he ventured, he could feel its tendrils digging deeper. His mind wandered back to the cave, to the lost souls that had surrounded him, their faces contorted with madness, their eyes burning with the same golden glow that had once reflected his own. He had fought them, defeated them in a way, but the terror that had filled their hollow gazes still haunted him. Had they been right? Would he eventually become like them? The thought made him shiver despite the heat of the desert. The hunger that clawed at him, was it his own, or was it the desert's? The lines between the two had blurred, and now, more than ever, he wasn't sure where he ended and the desert began. Ethan stopped in his tracks when he heard it, the rattle. At first he thought it was a trick of his mind, a distant memory of the serpents he had once commanded. But then it came again, closer this time, sharp and clear, like a warning. His breath caught in his throat, and for the first time since leaving the cavern, panic gripped his chest. His head whipped around, his glowing eyes scanning the horizon, searching for the source of the sound. There was nothing but the endless sand stretching out before him. The desert was empty. Yet the rattle continued, persistent, as if it were mocking him, taunting him with the very thing he was trying to outrun. No, he muttered, his voice a growl of frustration. Not again. But it wasn't just the rattle. As the wind shifted, he could feel it. A presence, something close, something alive, slithering through the sand just beneath the surface. The desert itself seemed to awaken, as if responding to his defiance, stirring from its long slumber. And then he saw it, the first of many, a massive rattlesnake, its scales shimmering like polished glass, its eyes a golden hue, glowing with an intelligence that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. It slithered out from the dunes, its body coiling and uncoiling with unnatural speed. It was followed by another, and then another, until the ground around Ethan was teeming with the creatures. The rattlesnakes surrounded him, their eyes fixed on him with eerie precision. Ethan's pulse quickened, his claws flexing instinctively, his fangs aching with hunger. It wasn't just the rattlesnakes he feared. It was the overwhelming sense that they were not just creatures. They were manifestations of the desert's will, extensions of the curse itself. "Why are you here?" he demanded, his voice hoarse, cracking under the strain of his growing panic. The largest of the snakes, the one that had been at the head of the pack, slithered forward, its rattle growing louder with each passing second. It stopped just before him, lifting its head to meet his gaze. "You know why we're here." The snake's voice slithered into his mind, its words like poison, smooth and insidious. "The desert does not let go so easily. You are ours, rattlesnake man, forever." Ethan recoiled as a wave of nausea surged through him. The voice was familiar, inhuman, but somehow human. It was the voice of the desert itself, whispering its demands. "No," Ethan snarled, taking a step back. "I broke free from you. I won't be your slave anymore." The rattlesnake's head tilted, its golden eyes narrowing. "You believe you are free, foolish creature. You are bound to the desert. Your heart beats with its hunger. Your flesh is molded by its curse. You cannot escape what you are." Ethan's claws dug into the earth as his body began to tremble with the weight of the truth. The desert had claimed him, and now it was clawing its way back into his very soul, erasing the last remnants of his humanity. The rattle grew louder, more insistent, until it filled his entire mind. The urge to submit, to surrender to the desert's will, surged within him, and for a moment he felt himself weakening, his will faltering. But then he remembered the cave, the creature that had guided him there, the lost souls that had begged for release. They were all trapped. They had given in. He would not make the same mistake. With a guttural roar, Ethan tore himself away from the rattle's pull. "I refuse," he spat, his voice raw, filled with defiance. "I will not become one of you." The rattlesnake's gaze darkened, and it raised its head high, its body coiling in a threatening motion. "You are a fool," it hissed. "The desert will always claim its own." Ethan's heart raced, his blood pounding in his ears. The hunger that had once been a faint whisper was now a roaring inferno, gnawing at his insides, demanding that he give in. But he clenched his fists, summoning the last of his strength. "I will not belong to you," he shouted, his voice filled with the last remnants of his human will. The rattlesnake hesitated, its golden eyes flickering for a moment, before it hissed in irritation and retreated into the sand, the rest of the serpents following suit. They disappeared as quickly as they had come, leaving Ethan alone, breathless and trembling in the vast empty desert. For what felt like an eternity, Ethan stood in the desert, his chest heaving with each ragged breath. The rattlesnakes were gone, but their presence lingered in the back of his mind, like an echo that wouldn't fade. The hunger still gnawed at him, deep and insistent, but he had not surrendered, not yet. But his body felt different now. The scales on his skin seemed to burn, and the air around him felt thicker, heavier. He had fought the desert's call, but he knew it was only a matter of time before it came again. The curse was no longer just a physical transformation. It had become a part of him, woven into his very soul. And then, as he stared out at the horizon, a voice drifted through the wind, a soft whispering voice that seemed to come from nowhere. "You will never escape. The desert owns you. Ethan turned his head sharply, his eyes scanning the endless expanse of sand. But there was no one there, only the desert, empty and silent. Yet the voice remained like a lingering shadow, forever haunting him. The desert stretched endlessly before him, an ocean of sand that seemed to twist and pulse like a living thing. Ethan's legs burned with every step, the harsh reality of his transformation settling deeper into his bones. His body, his once human body, felt alien to him now. The scales on his skin had grown thicker, more pronounced, their color deepening to an iridescent black that shimmered in the light. His senses were heightened, but his control over them was slipping. Every sound, every shift in the wind, felt magnified, as if the desert itself was speaking to him, whispering its secrets and demands. The rattle of the serpents, that maddening sound, had faded into the distance, but its echo remained, buzzing in his ears, a constant reminder of the curse that clung to him. Ethan stumbled, his claws scraping the rough terrain as his legs buckled beneath him. His vision blurred, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to tilt. The hunger, the gnawing, insatiable hunger, roared within him, clawing at his mind, at his soul. It was no longer a mere physical craving, but something deeper, something that went beyond flesh. His breathing grew shallow, his chest tightening as the darkness in his vision threatened to overtake him. He collapsed to his knees, his clawed hands sinking into the sand, and for a moment, he allowed himself to rest. How long can I keep this up? He thought. How long before I finally give in? The desert whispered back, its voice a faint murmur in the wind. You cannot outrun me. You belong to me now. You are mine. Ethan gritted his teeth and shook his head, trying to push the voice away, but it only grew louder. The scales on his skin began to burn, the heat of the desert seeping into his very flesh. His body was changing more with each passing day, and he could feel the serpent inside him, its slithering, coiling presence that was gradually overtaking the man he had once been. But then, in the midst of his internal turmoil, he heard something else. A faint sound, a movement in the distance, a shadow against the setting sun. At first, Ethan thought he was imagining it, the desert's trickery playing with his mind. But the sound grew louder, closer, a faint rattle, the unmistakable sound of a snake's tail. He forced himself to stand, his knees buckling as he pushed through the pain. His claws scraped against the sand, propelling him forward, his eyes scanning the horizon. Through the shimmering heat, a figure emerged, one that was unmistakable. The figure that emerged from the desert was a man, or at least, what was once a man. His body was covered in dark, gleaming scales, his face a twisted mask of human and serpent features. His eyes glowed a vibrant gold, like molten sun, and his rattle echoed with a rhythmic sound that matched the pulse of the earth itself. It was the same creature, the one that had guided him into the cave. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature had once been a guide, a figure that had seemed to offer a path, but now it was a warning, a manifestation of the curse he had tried to escape. You still wander, Ethan. The creature's voice was a hiss, as smooth as the desert wind. Why? Why do you continue to run from your destiny? Ethan took a step back, his claws digging into the earth. I'm not running, he growled. I'm fighting. I won't become like you. The creature's golden eyes flickered, a knowing glint in them. You are already like me. You have been for some time. Ethan's breath hitched, his mind reeling. How can this be? The transformation had been slow, creeping over him, but he hadn't realized how far it had gone. Has the desert already taken me so completely? The creature circled around him, its body coiling like a serpent, its movements fluid and graceful. You fight it, but you cannot change what you are. The desert has chosen you. You are the rattlesnake man now. You are its servant. No, Ethan spat, shaking his head. I will not serve the desert. I won't be your puppet. The creature's laugh was cold, hollow. You already are. It stopped in front of him, its golden eyes boring into his. What do you think the hunger inside you is, Ethan? Do you think it is simply the desire for food? The need to consume? No, it is much more. The hunger is the desert itself, its very soul. It is what binds you to it, what keeps you tethered to this land. Ethan felt his stomach tighten, and the hunger surged again, stronger than ever, more insistent. The heat of the desert swelled inside him, pressing against his chest, threatening to swallow him whole. You are part of the desert now. The creature continued, its voice a soft whisper. You can't escape it. You never could. Ethan clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms as he struggled to regain control. I will find a way. I will not be a slave to this curse, not to you, not to the desert. The creature's eyes glowed brighter, its rattle ringing louder. Then come, face the heart of the desert. It will either free you or consume you entirely. The creature led him, winding through the endless expanse of sand, its form slipping between dunes like a shadow. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the barren landscape, and the air grew thick with the scent of earth and decay. The hunger inside Ethan gnawed at him, each step bringing him closer to something deep in the desert that called to him, a force more powerful than anything he had ever felt before. The desert was alive. It took hours, days perhaps, before they reached it. The heart of the desert, the place where the land itself seemed to pulse with a living energy. It was a chasm in the earth, a massive crack that seemed to stretch infinitely downward, its depths lost in darkness. From the mouth of the chasm, a deep rhythmic hum emanated, vibrating through the ground beneath Ethan's feet. The creature stopped at the edge of the chasm, its golden eyes glowing with anticipation. This is the source, it said, its voice filled with reverence. The heart of the desert, the place where all life begins and ends, the place where your true transformation will be completed. Ethan's throat went dry, and he could feel the pull of the chasm, an overwhelming force that beckoned him forward, urging him to step closer. He could feel the desert's power thrumming in his veins, each beat of his heart synchronized with the hum of the earth. He shook his head, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Number, I won't go down there. I won't become part of this. The creature's eyes narrowed. You have no choice. You belong to it now. With a final, deliberate motion, the creature slithered forward, disappearing into the chasm. Ethan stood at the edge, staring down into the darkness, his heart racing. The hunger, the call of the desert, was louder now, urging him to leap into the abyss. But something deep within him, something human, refused to give in. Ethan stood at the precipice, his body trembling as the dark chasm yawned before him. The abyss seemed endless, a hollow, bottomless void that swallowed the light of the setting sun, leaving only shadows and whispers behind. The air was thick with an ancient, oppressive presence, and the desert's heartbeat pulsed beneath his feet, reverberating through his entire being. The hunger clawed at him, insatiable and gnawing. It was no longer just a craving for food. It was the desert itself, tugging at his soul, urging him to step into the chasm and surrender. The creature had spoken the truth. He had no choice but to face this place. This was the heart of the desert, the source of his curse, and it beckoned with an allure that threatened to consume him entirely. But he couldn't. He couldn't let it. Not yet. The air felt thick with anticipation, and as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan's mind raced. He could feel the transformation pushing further within him. His body was on the verge of becoming something more, something other. The scales on his arms had spread to his neck. The edges of his fingers twisted into elongated claws, and his eyes gleamed with a golden hue that wasn't entirely his own. He was losing himself, bit by bit. The creature's voice echoed in the distance, its tone mocking and patient. "You are already one with the desert, Ethan. Step forward and claim your birthright." Ethan's hands clenched into fists, the sharp claws digging into his palms. His breath came in ragged gasps, and for a moment he felt himself waver, felt the pull of the chasm's dark promise. The hunger inside him grew stronger, its presence consuming his every thought. But then something shifted. A flicker of light, something pure, something human, broke through the madness. He wasn't just a vessel for the desert. He wasn't just a tool of the curse. He was Ethan, a man who still had the power to choose. With a growl of defiance, Ethan turned away from the chasm, his eyes narrowing as the hunger continued to gnaw at his insides. He would not step into the abyss, not yet. The wind picked up, swirling around him, carrying the whispers of the desert. The voice of the creature still echoed in his mind, insistent and mocking. "You cannot escape your destiny. It is written in your blood. Your flesh is already bound to the desert." Ethan closed his eyes and focused, pushing aside the voice, the hunger, the desert's grip. The golden glow in his eyes flickered, then dimmed. His breathing steadied, and he took a step back, feeling the sand shift beneath his feet. "I will not be your puppet," he whispered, his voice hoarse and raw. I will fight until the end." As Ethan turned his back on the chasm, he could feel the weight of the desert's gaze upon him. It was as though the very earth had noticed his defiance, and now it was watching, waiting. The wind howled around him, and the ground seemed to tremble with an ancient force that whispered of inevitability. For the first time in days, he felt an uneasy sense of calm, a quiet that seemed to extend throughout the desert. But it was a fleeting calm. The creature was not done with him, and neither was the desert. The hunger had not subsided. It was merely waiting, like a serpent coiling silently beneath the sand, ready to strike when he least expected it. Ethan continued to walk, putting as much distance between himself and the chasm as possible. Each step was heavy, his body weary, but he refused to give in. He could feel the hunger twisting inside him, but there was something more, a spark of defiance that kept him moving. "What now?" he thought. "Where do I go from here?" The desert stretched on endlessly, an ocean of sand that seemed to go on forever. The world around him felt both alive and dead, a vast, unchanging expanse that would never relent. There was no escape, not from the hunger, not from the curse. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something. A flicker in the distance, a shadow moving against the endless dunes. It was a figure. At first, Ethan thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. The desert had a way of distorting reality, making things seem closer or farther than they really were. But the figure was getting closer, moving with purpose across the desert, its shape outlined against the dimming sky. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. He had not expected anyone else to be here. No one else could survive the desert's wrath. But there it was, an answer to his prayers, perhaps. The figure was humanoid, but its movements were erratic, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. It stumbled forward, its body bent and broken, its clothes torn and tattered. As it drew closer, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was a man, one who had once been human, but now he was a twisted mockery of life, his body contorted and covered in scales. His eyes were empty sockets, glowing faintly with a sickly golden hue, and his lips were pulled back into a permanent, horrified grimace. Ethan stepped back instinctively, his heart pounding in his chest. He recognized the man. He had seen him before. The cave, the lost souls. This was one of them, one of the cursed who had failed to escape, who had given in to the desert and its hunger. The man reached out with one trembling hand, his fingers curling into claws. His voice was a broken whisper filled with agony. "Help me," he rasped, his voice crackling with desperation. It's too late for me. It's too late for all of us." Ethan's stomach churned, and he could feel the hunger inside him flare once more. The man's words were a warning. The desert was not just a physical place. It was a force, a curse that claimed those who dared to disturb its peace. And now, it was claiming him. The man staggered forward, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. "You will not escape," the man whispered, his voice a hollow echo. "None of us ever do. We are bound to it, forever." Ethan's pulse quickened, the weight of the man's words sinking deep into his mind. He wanted to help, to fight back, but the man's presence only intensified the hunger within him. The scales on his body burned, the urge to consume growing stronger with every passing moment. The desert was speaking to him now, not through words, but through his own body. The desert is you, and you are the desert. The truth hit him like a wave, and for a moment he was overwhelmed. This wasn't just about escaping the curse. It wasn't just about surviving. This was about a complete and total transformation, an inevitable descent into madness, into monstrosity. He had been marked by the desert, and no matter what he did, he would never be free. The man in front of him fell to his knees, his body trembling violently as his transformation accelerated. The scales spread across his skin, his body contorting as he shrieked in agony. Ethan watched in horror as the man's final cry faded into a rattle, his body collapsing into the sands, his form dissolving into a cloud of dust. His soul was lost to the desert, and then Ethan knew, this is the price. Ethan stood alone now, the desolate landscape stretching around him like a vast ocean of sand. The man's final scream still echoed in his mind, a chilling reminder of what awaited him if he could not escape the desert's clutches. But what was escape? Could he escape the curse that had been thrust upon him? The answer was no. He had been marked by the desert, and the desert would claim him piece by piece. With that realization, the last vestiges of his humanity began to slip away. His claws twitched with hunger, his golden eyes glowing with a feral light. The scales spread farther, creeping up his neck over his face. He wanted to scream, he wanted to fight, but he knew now. He was the rattlesnake man, the desert's creature, forever, and the rattle in the distance seemed to confirm it. Ethan stumbled forward, his legs heavy, his breath ragged. The transformation was complete. His hands, now monstrous, clawed and scaled, dragged across the sand as he fought to maintain his balance. The hunger gnawed at him incessantly, an insidious presence that pulsed beneath his skin, filling his every thought. He could feel the desert inside him now, its rhythm syncing with the frantic beat of his heart. His golden eyes burned with a ferocity that was no longer his own, the deep abyss of the chasm still haunting his memory. The pull of it, the temptation to surrender, remained strong. He had seen what awaited those who couldn't escape, had witnessed the last breath of the man who had tried. But he wouldn't end like that. He couldn't. Every step felt like a battle against himself, against the hunger that surged through his veins like poison. The serpent inside him writhed, pushing for control, eager to claim him entirely. It whispered to him in a language he no longer understood, but its meaning was clear. You are mine. You cannot resist. But Ethan wasn't ready to give in, not yet. The desert had taken so much from him already, his humanity, his mind, his very soul. And yet, there was still a part of him, buried deep beneath the scales and the hunger that refused to surrender. He was still Ethan. He still had his will, even if it was only a fragment of the man he used to be. Ahead, the sky was darkening, a storm gathering on the horizon. The wind had picked up, whirling around him, kicking up the sand in sharp, biting gusts. The rattle in the distance echoed louder than ever. The serpents were out there, circling, waiting. He had to find a way to end this, to break free of the curse, to sever the connection between himself and the desert. But how? He had searched for answers, sought the truth, but the desert had only given him more riddles. The myth of the rattlesnake man had been a warning, a tale whispered to children, a story of vengeance and rebirth. But now, in the heart of the desert, he knew the truth. It was a curse, a punishment for those who dared to disturb the balance. And he had disturbed it. He had killed those serpents, broken their fragile peace. He had brought this upon himself. The wind howled again, and Ethan raised his head. Through the dust and the haze of his confusion, he saw something, movement, a figure standing against the wind. It was the creature, the one who had guided him here. It stood tall and imposing, its golden eyes glowing in the storm's darkness, its body writhing with serpentine grace. The creature's rattle echoed, and Ethan's skin crawled at the sound. The hunger flared up inside him, and for a moment, he thought he might lose himself entirely to it. But he fought it down, pushing against the tide of his transformation. "Come to me," the creature hissed, its voice like the sound of sand sliding over stone. "Come and accept what you are. Embrace the desert. Let it fill you completely." Ethan snarled, his claws extending as he clenched his fists. "No." His voice was hoarse but firm. "I will not become you. I will not let the desert claim me completely." The creature laughed, a low, unsettling sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "You already are me, Ethan. You are the rattlesnake man now. You are the desert. You have always been. Ethan shook his head, stepping back, his body trembling. The hunger surged again, more forceful than ever. He could feel his skin crawling, the scales shifting beneath it, the darkness pressing in on his mind. The creature's words were like poison, seeping into his thoughts, eroding his resistance. But then, something flickered, something deep within his chest, a spark of defiance. I will not be consumed by this. With every ounce of will he could muster, Ethan fought back. He gritted his teeth, focusing on the flickering light within him, the last remnants of his humanity. I'm not done fighting, he snarled, his voice gaining strength. I'll never be done fighting. And with that, something inside him snapped. The creature's golden eyes widened as Ethan's body convulsed, the scales on his skin shifting, glowing with a fiery intensity. His veins pulsed with dark energy as the hunger inside him roared, demanding to be fed, demanding control. His breath came in short, jagged gasps, his claws digging into the sand as he fought against the overwhelming pull. The creature hissed, stepping forward, its rattle echoing in the growing storm. You cannot fight it, Ethan. You are already lost. But Ethan wouldn't listen. He couldn't. There was still a spark within him that refused to go out. He was not going to become just another wretched thing in the desert, another cursed soul doomed to fade into legend. Suddenly, the desert seemed to roar around him, the winds howling with fury as if the very earth was rejecting his defiance. The hunger surged, threatening to consume him entirely. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt himself falling, his mind drifting away. But before he could succumb, a voice echoed, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Ethan! He froze. It was a voice from his past, a voice he had thought lost forever. Ethan, listen to me. He strained to hear, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice, it was his mother's. Don't give in. Fight for yourself. Fight for the man you were, the man you still are. The hunger faltered, the darkness wavering for just a moment. Ethan's heart hammered as the scales on his body began to recede, the burn in his chest easing. His claws, once so sharp, began to retract, and his vision cleared. For the first time in what felt like forever, the desert's grip loosened. No, the creature hissed, its voice filled with rage. You cannot be saved. You belong to me now. Ethan's golden eyes flickered as he took a step back, his legs trembling. The voice of his mother still echoed in his mind, a lifeline in the overwhelming darkness. I belong to myself, he whispered, his voice growing stronger. I belong to myself. With a roar that shook the very earth beneath him, Ethan threw himself forward, tearing through the desert's influence with every ounce of strength he had left. The creature lunged at him, but Ethan's claws slashed through the air, cutting through the illusion of the desert itself. The wind screamed, the rattle echoed one last time, and then nothing. The silence was deafening. Ethan stood alone in the storm, his body shaking, his heart still racing, but the hunger was gone. The desert's pull had faded. He was still human, for now. The silence lingered like a suffocating shroud, thick with tension and the weight of what had just transpired. Ethan stood in the center of the desert storm, his breathing ragged, his body trembling from the exertion of the struggle. The hunger, the insatiable, gnawing hunger that had clawed at him for days, had faded, leaving behind an eerie calm. For the first time since the curse took root, He felt the desert's influence loosen its grip on him. The wind still howled, swirling around him in violent gusts, but the rattling sound that had followed him for so long was absent. The desert, once alive with whispers and threats, now felt hollow, dead, as if it had given up on him, had relinquished its claim over his soul. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, and he closed his eyes, trying to steady himself, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had fought back, he had won, but at what cost? He could still feel the scales on his skin, faint but undeniable. His body was no longer entirely human, and no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, the hunger still simmered beneath the surface, like a fire that could flare up at any moment. The creature's voice still echoed in his mind, a sinister reminder of the curse that had nearly consumed him. "You belong to the desert now," the creature had said. "You always will." Ethan's hands clenched into fists, his claws digging into his palms. The creature was right in one respect. He was no longer fully human. The desert had left its mark on him, and no amount of defiance could undo that. But he was not the monster the creature wanted him to become. He was still Ethan. He was still Ethan. The thought sent a shock of hope through him, cutting through the fog of despair that had settled in his mind. But as the storm raged around him, that hope was tempered by a creeping realization. The desert had not given up on him entirely. The rattlesnake man was still alive within him, his body still a twisted reflection of the creature he had been warned about. And though he had fought to retain his humanity, he could feel the transformation creeping back, slowly, relentlessly. Was this it? Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar sound, the rattle of a snake. His head snapped up, his golden eyes scanning the swirling sands. He could hear it more clearly now, more than one rattle. It was as though the desert itself was warning him, urging him to turn back. But he couldn't go back, not now. There, through the haze of dust and wind, he saw them. Dozens, maybe more. The rattlesnakes, their bodies coiled and undulating, their beady eyes glowing with an eerie light. They emerged from the desert's depths, as if called by some unseen force, drawn to him. Ethan's pulse quickened, his body reacting instinctively. He could feel their presence in his bones, could hear their hissing voices echoing in his mind. The hunger stirred within him again, more intense this time. His scales burned, and his heart pounded with the urge to strike, to kill, to consume. He clenched his fists, struggling to keep control, but the pull of the snakes was overwhelming. And then, a voice broke through the turmoil. Not the creatures this time, but something else. "You are not the monster they want you to be," the voice said, soothing yet firm. Ethan's heart stopped. It was her voice, his mother's. He could feel her presence, her love, like a beacon in the dark. "You are Ethan," she continued. "You are more than this curse. You are more than the desert's call." Ethan's vision blurred with tears, and for the first time in days, he felt a true sense of peace. His mother's voice, once lost to him, was now a lifeline, a connection to everything he had been and everything he still could be. The snakes continued to approach, their rattles growing louder, their bodies coiling in preparation to strike. But Ethan stood still, his heart steady, his mind clear. "I choose who I am," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. He could feel the power of the desert, the hunger, the transformation. It was all still there, still fighting for control. But now, he chose to fight back. He chose to be Ethan, not the monster the desert wanted him to become. With a cry, Ethan threw himself forward, plunging into the swarm of rattlesnakes. His body surged with power, the serpentine hunger threatening to consume him. But he pushed through it, focusing on the vision of his mother's face, the light she had left in his heart. He felt the transformation pulse beneath his skin, but he resisted. He refused. For a moment, the world around him seemed to shudder, the desert itself recoiling from the sheer force of his will. The snakes froze, their rattles silenced, their bodies still. Ethan stood amidst them, his heart pounding, his mind clearer than it had been in days. The battle was not over, but in that moment, he had won a small victory. The desert had claimed him, but it had not claimed his soul. As the rattlesnakes slowly slithered away, retreating into the shadows of the dunes, Ethan stood motionless, his breath steadying. The world around him had fallen silent once again, and the wind had died down, leaving only the soft whisper of sand against sand. But the silence was deceiving. The hunger still gnawed at him, deep and insistent. He could feel the transformation threatening to break through again, but he wasn't the same man he had been when he first arrived in the desert. No longer a man desperate to survive, to escape. He had come to realize something crucial. This battle wasn't just about the curse. It was about his identity. Ethan had accepted that he could not undo what had been done, that the desert would always be a part of him now, but he could choose how it defined him. He didn't have to become a legend. He didn't have to become the monster. Ethan turned his back on the swarming rattlesnakes, the urge to flee overtaking him. The desert was vast, its reach endless, but there was still something inside him, something more powerful than the hunger, that refused to let go. As he walked, his thoughts began to crystallize. The rattlesnake man was not a single fate. It was a story told by the desert to control and consume. He would not be its tool. He would forge a new story, one where he fought for his soul, for his humanity, even in the face of the monstrous. He did not know what awaited him in the future. The desert was still there, still a part of him, but he knew now that he would walk this path, not as a monster, but as Ethan, a man who had faced the worst of what the world had to offer and still chose to live, to fight. And in the end, that was enough. Years passed, and the stories of the rattlesnake man grew. Some said he was a creature of the desert, a monstrous being whose rattle could be heard echoing across the sands, warning those who dared to venture too far. Others said he was a man who had walked into the desert, a victim of its curse, and never returned. But the truth was lost to the winds, as all truths often are in the desert. What mattered most was that Ethan never gave up. He never let the desert consume him entirely. His name became a legend, an echo of something both terrible and hopeful. And as the rattlesnakes continued to rattle their warning in the vast, unforgiving desert, the legend of the man who had fought the desert and won lived on, carried by the wind, whispered across the dunes. The wind in the Ozarks had a voice. It wasn't a soft whisper or a comforting breeze, but a deep, mournful wail that seemed to echo through the woods, curling around the limbs of ancient trees. The people of the small town of West Hollow had learned to ignore it over the years, believing it was nothing more than the wind's constant lament. But Eliza had always listened. From the time she was a small child, the wind had beckoned to her "Don't go near the tree, Eliza," her grandmother would warn, her voice low and filled with a quiet terror. "It's not just a tree, child. It's a doorway to something worse than you can imagine." But Eliza, now 17, was far past the age where she would heed such warnings. She wasn't a little girl anymore, and the stories her grandmother told her felt like old, fading tales. She longed for something real, something that would make her feel alive. One evening, as dusk settled over the hills, Eliza felt the pull stronger than ever. It was like a force outside of her own will, a silent command she couldn't resist. Her heart pounded as she walked through the woods behind her grandmother's cabin, her boots crunching on the dried leaves, each step drawing her closer to the ancient blackthorn tree that stood in a clearing. The tree was a gnarled, twisted thing, its bark black as coal, and its roots dug deep into the earth like veins of some long-dead creature. Its branches stretched upwards, warped and crooked, like fingers trying to grasp the sky. The local legend spoke of its origins, how it had been planted by a man who dabbled in forbidden rites, how it had come to life and slowly began to consume the souls of anyone who came near. Eliza had always thought of the stories as superstition, but standing before the tree now, she felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. The air around it was unnaturally still, as if the forest itself held its breath in fear of what lay beyond the tree's dark bark. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "It will call to you, Eliza. You must never answer." But Eliza's curiosity outweighed the fear that gnawed at her. She reached out a hand toward the tree, her fingertips trembling as they hovered just inches from the rough surface. It wasn't the wind that pushed her forward. It wasn't a ghost or a vision. It was something much darker. Before she could stop herself, Eliza touched the tree. A sharp, icy sensation shot up her arm, as though the tree were alive, its very essence coursing through her veins. Her breath caught in her throat as a surge of power flooded her chest. For a moment, she felt invincible, as though the tree had unlocked something within her. But just as quickly, a wave of nausea crashed over her, and she staggered back, her hand falling away from the cursed wood. The forest seemed to tremble. The wind howled, louder now, swirling around her with unnatural ferocity. Eliza's heart raced as she stumbled backward, trying to regain her bearings. The world around her felt distorted, like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. And then she heard it, a voice, distant but unmistakable. It called her name. "Eliza." Her blood ran cold. It was a voice she had never heard before, deep and resonant, like 1,000 voices speaking at once, whispering in her ears. "Eliza, come to me." She spun around, her eyes darting in every direction, but there was no one there. The trees stood silent, their twisted branches moving in rhythm with the wind. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts, but the voice lingered in her mind, pulling at her. It was then that she realized she wasn't alone. Something was inside her, something ancient and dark, coiling in the pit of her stomach like a serpent. She gasped for air, clutching her chest, feeling as though her very soul was being consumed. The tree, it hadn't just called to her, it had claimed her. When Eliza returned to the cabin that night, her grandmother was waiting for her, sitting in the dim glow of the hearth. Her face was drawn, her eyes dark with worry. She didn't need to ask where Eliza had been. The moment the door opened, her grandmother's gaze locked onto her with a knowing dread. "You touched it, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Eliza hesitated, her hands shaking as she leaned against the door frame. The effects of the tree's touch were already taking hold. Her mind felt foggy, her thoughts slipping through her fingers like sand. She could still hear the voice in her head, though it was quieter now, almost soothing. I didn't mean to," Eliza said, her voice distant, almost as if she wasn't the one speaking. "But I felt it, pulling me." Her grandmother rose slowly, her eyes filled with sorrow. "The blackthorn tree doesn't pull, Eliza. It consumes, and you've allowed it to claim you. There's no turning back now." Eliza flinched. "What do you mean?" Her grandmother reached for an old weathered book from the shelf, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. "This tree, this cursed thing, has been here long before any of us. It's a gateway to something that should never have been unleashed. It traps souls, Eliza. It feeds on the living, and when it has you, it won't stop until it has taken everything." A strange sensation crawled up Eliza's spine, and she felt her fingers twitch involuntarily. The voice was growing louder again, but this time it wasn't calling her name. It was laughing, cold, cruel, mocking laughter that sent a shiver of dread through her body. Her grandmother's face paled. "It's already inside you. You have to fight it, Eliza. You have to be stronger than it, or it will take your mind and your body." But Eliza wasn't listening. The voice was too strong, too powerful. It had taken root inside her, feeding on her fear and doubt, twisting her thoughts. She could feel its power coursing through her, sharpening her senses, making her feel alive in ways she had never known before. The last shred of her will was slipping away, and she was powerless to stop it. As the days passed, the changes in Eliza grew more noticeable. At first, it was subtle, a momentary lapse in judgment, a strange twitch of her eye, a smile that didn't quite reach her lips. But soon, the transformation became undeniable. Eliza's grandmother watched in horror as her granddaughter's behavior grew more erratic. She would speak in riddles, her words tangled in a strange cadence, and her eyes would glaze over as though she were seeing something no one else could. It wasn't just the way she acted, it was the way she looked. Her skin seemed paler, her features sharper, like something was leeching the life out of her. The air around her crackled with an unsettling energy, and those who crossed her path started to notice the changes too. The first disappearance happened 3 days after Eliza's encounter with the tree. A neighbor, Mr. Dalton, who had lived down the road from the cabin, was found gone without a trace. The door to his house was left wide open, his breakfast untouched on the table. No one could explain what happened to him. Then came the others. A woman found dead at the edge of the woods, her body contorted in unnatural ways. Another man vanished into thin air, his house left locked from the inside. People started to whisper. Eliza was at the center of it all, and the tree, it seemed to watch, its branches swaying as if it were alive, waiting for something. The morning after Mr. Dalton's disappearance, the town was on edge. Rumors of strange happenings spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before people began to speak in hushed tones about Eliza and the cursed blackthorn tree. No one dared go near it, not anymore. But the whispers were there, growing louder with each passing day. Eliza's grandmother, Annabelle, was terrified. The change in her granddaughter was unmistakable. Her once bright eyes were now cold, calculating, like two dark pools reflecting a storm. There were moments when Eliza's voice would drop to a guttural growl, as if someone else was speaking through her, and then, at other times, her eyes would widen in fear, as if she was desperately trying to fight the evil inside her. "Please, Eliza," Annabelle begged one evening as they sat in front of the fire. "I know you can hear me. You must fight this. You can't let it take over. You have to hold on." Eliza stared at her, but her face was blank, emotionless, distant. "I don't want to," she whispered, but the voice that emerged from her throat was not her own. It was a dark, malevolent tone, as though it were coming from somewhere deep within her, or perhaps from something far older and far worse. "You will," the voice hissed. "You will surrender to me, and you will bring the others. This town will fall, and I will have them all." Annabelle recoiled, clutching her chest as though the very words had struck her like a physical blow. She had heard the stories, yes, but she had never imagined that the ancient evil could be so real, so terrifying. Eliza stood, her movements stiff, jerky. She had started to sleep less, her body growing more gaunt with each passing day. Her hair, once golden and bright, now hung in long, tangled strands. Her skin was pale, drained of warmth, and her lips had lost their color. "I'll never let you win," Annabelle whispered to herself, though the words felt hollow. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her, as though the very earth was conspiring against her. It was too late to save Eliza. The evil had already made its mark. Days turned into weeks, and the town of West Hollow became a place of whispered fears and locked doors. People who had once been kind neighbors began to distance themselves, too afraid to be near the girl who had once been a bright young woman, full of life and promise. The disappearances grew more frequent. No one was safe. The town square, once bustling with life, was now eerily quiet. The wind howled through the streets at night, carrying with it the scent of something foul, like rotting wood and decaying flesh. People began to speak of strange shadows in the woods, of figures watching them from the trees. And then, the first true sign of the curse's power manifested. It was a cool, overcast morning when Eliza went missing. Her grandmother had awoken to find the cabin empty, the door wide open. The wind carried with it a chilling wail, as though it mourned something lost. Annabelle's heart raced as she searched the woods, calling Eliza's name, but there was no answer. The only sound was the rustling of the trees, the same trees that whispered and groaned like they were alive. Panic surged within her as she stumbled toward the clearing, the place where the blackthorn tree stood. When she reached it, she stopped dead in her tracks. There, beneath the tree, was Eliza, but she wasn't herself anymore. Her face was twisted into an eerie, unnatural grin, and her eyes, those once vibrant, loving eyes, were now pools of blackness, void of humanity. She stood still, her arms outstretched as if she were waiting for something or someone. "Eliza," Annabelle gasped, her voice trembling. "Eliza, please, come back to me." But Eliza didn't move. Instead, the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble, and the air grew cold, unnaturally cold. The blackthorn tree shuddered, as though alive, its branches creaking in time with the pulse of the earth. The voice came again, that low, mocking tone that seemed to emanate from the very air. "She is mine now." Annabelle's heart froze. Her granddaughter, her sweet, innocent Eliza, was gone. The spirit of the tree had claimed her completely, but there was no time to mourn, for the evil had already begun to spread beyond the tree. In the distance, the town of West Hollow began to unravel. A figure moved in the shadows, watching, waiting. The evil inside Eliza had begun to seep into the town, spreading like an infection. It was only a matter of time before it would consume everything. Annabelle knew she had to act fast. The longer Eliza remained under the tree's influence, the stronger the curse would grow. But how could she fight something that had already taken root so deeply? She searched through old books, desperate for a way to break the curse. Her hands shook as she turned the pages of ancient texts, hoping to find something, anything, that would tell her how to save her granddaughter. And then she found it, a passage buried deep within an old folklore tome, spoke of the ritual that could reverse the curse, but it came at a terrible price. The spirit that possessed the tree, the ancient force that had been feeding on souls for centuries, could only be banished if the host, Eliza, willingly returned to the tree. She would have to surrender her soul in order to sever the connection. But the text also warned of a terrible consequence. The moment the host surrendered, the evil would consume the spirit of the one who performed the ritual. Annabelle would have to make an impossible choice: save her granddaughter and lose herself, or let Eliza remain trapped forever. Annabelle arrived at the clearing just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. The air was thick with tension, the wind carrying whispers of unseen horrors. Eliza stood before the tree once again, her eyes empty, her face a mask of twisted indifference. The voice inside her, inside the tree, spoke through her once more. "You cannot save her, old woman. She belongs to me now." Annabelle stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Eliza, listen to me. You're still in there. You have to fight. You have to let go." For a moment, Eliza's eyes flickered with recognition. Her lips parted, but the words that came out were not her own. "You can't stop me. She will be mine forever." Annabelle closed her eyes, her hands trembling as she reached into the pouch at her waist, pulling out the ancient relic she had found in the books, a shard of obsidian, black and cold to the touch. The ritual had to be completed before it was too late. She spoke the words aloud, her voice trembling but strong. "In darkness and death I offer my soul. Let the curse be broken and the spirits be freed." The ground beneath them trembled, and the tree groaned as if it were alive, its branches writhing in agony. A low guttural scream filled the air, and for a moment the earth seemed to open up beneath Annabelle's feet. And then, silence. When Annabelle awoke, the first thing she noticed was the stillness, the oppressive weight that had hung over the town. The fear that had gripped every soul was gone. The air felt lighter, almost as if the earth itself had exhaled in relief. Eliza was lying beside her, her once twisted face now peaceful, her eyes closed. But there was no sign of the evil spirit that had once consumed her. The blackthorn tree was gone too, its ancient gnarled roots no longer threatening the earth. The curse was broken, but as Annabelle gazed at her granddaughter, she knew the cost of the victory. She had given everything to save her, and now she would face the consequences. The evil had been defeated, but Annabelle had become part of the forest itself, bound to the land as a guardian, forever entwined with the tree that had once threatened them all. And in the distance, far beyond the reach of the clearing, something stirred in the shadows. The curse had been broken, for now. Annabelle stood at the edge of the clearing, her fingers trembling as she touched the stone that once marked the blackthorn tree's root. The ground had settled back into its natural state. Nothing remained of the cursed tree, not even the faintest memory of its twisted, gnarled branches. Eliza, who had once been consumed by the malevolent spirit, lay unconscious beside her. Her breathing was steady now, her skin no longer pale, her eyes free from the black void that had taken hold of them. It was as if the curse had simply vanished, leaving behind a shell of the girl Annabelle had once known. For the first time in weeks, the world felt still, as if time had paused to give them a moment of reprieve. But Annabelle could feel it. Deep inside her, something was wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. The weight of the forest felt oppressive, as if it were watching them, waiting for something to happen. The ground beneath her feet shifted slightly, as if the earth were breathing. Annabelle stiffened, her heart skipping a beat. She glanced around, but there was no sign of movement, no shadow flickering at the edge of her vision. Yet the feeling remained. "Eliza," Annabelle whispered, crouching beside her granddaughter. She placed a gentle hand on Eliza's forehead, her fingers brushing through the strands of her tangled hair. For a moment, Eliza didn't stir, but then her eyelids fluttered open, and she looked up at Annabelle with confusion in her eyes. "Grandma?" Her voice was hoarse, weak, but there was something undeniably human about it now. Annabelle let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She smiled, though it was a strained, fragile thing. "You're back, Eliza. You're safe." Eliza blinked a few times, her gaze unfocused as she slowly pushed herself up, her body feeling stiff from the ordeal. "What happened? I remember darkness, and then..." Her voice trailed off, as if the memory was too painful to articulate. Annabelle opened her mouth to answer, but the ground beneath them trembled once more, this time more violently. The air grew cold again, an unnatural chill seeping into her bones. The trees surrounding them creaked, their branches swaying as though moved by an unseen force. "Eliza, stay close," Annabelle urged, her voice tense. She stood up quickly, scanning the clearing. The atmosphere had shifted. The peace they'd felt was nothing more than an illusion. Suddenly, the faintest echo of a whisper stirred the wind. "It is not over." Annabelle's heart dropped into her stomach. The voice, low and familiar, reverberated through her bones. It was the same voice, the one that had once spoken through Eliza, the one that had come from the blackthorn tree. She turned to Eliza, panic rising in her chest. "We need to go, now." But Eliza didn't move. Her eyes were wide, staring at something in the distance, her expression blank, almost entranced. "Eliza?" Annabelle called again, her voice shaking. The wind picked up, swirling in violent gusts, and Eliza's lips parted as she spoke, her voice low and distant. "It's calling to me." Annabelle's blood ran cold. She reached for Eliza's hand, but before she could make contact, the ground shifted again, and from beneath the earth, a dark figure began to rise. It was the shape of a man, tall and thin, with blackened skin that seemed to absorb the light. His eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, and his mouth stretched into a grin that was both familiar and terrifying. "Eliza." The figure's voice was distorted, as though it were coming from the very depths of the earth. It wasn't human. It was something far worse. Annabelle's mind raced. It can't be. The blackthorn tree had been destroyed. She had performed the ritual. The curse was broken, so why was it here? "Eliza, listen to me," Annabelle shouted, grabbing her granddaughter by the shoulders and shaking her. "You have to fight it. You can fight it. This isn't real. The curse is broken." But Eliza's face remained vacant, her eyes glazed over. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling with a terrible understanding. "It's too late." The figure stepped forward, the earth groaning beneath his feet as he moved. The wind howled as the trees bent under an unseen weight, their branches clawing at the sky. Annabelle felt the dark energy pulse in the air like a living thing, and with each step the figure took, the light seemed to dim. "You were too weak," the figure crooned, his voice like the crackling of burning wood. "You thought you could stop me, but the tree was never the true source of power. The tree merely housed me. I am the darkness that feeds on the soul." Annabelle stepped back, her pulse pounding in her ears. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse with fear. The figure smiled wider, his teeth sharp and yellowed. "I am the true force behind the curse. The blackthorn tree was only a gateway, a vessel to bring me forth. But the land itself belongs to me, and now Eliza belongs to me too." Eliza's head snapped to the side, her eyes flickering with something far darker than before. The evil spirit was still within her, still tethered to her soul. It had never truly left. Annabelle's thoughts raced, frantic. There had to be another way, another ritual, something she missed, some final hope. But there was no time. The evil was growing stronger by the second. "Eliza," Annabelle cried out, "fight it! You can't give in!" For the briefest moment, Eliza's eyes cleared. "Grandma, I don't know how to fight it anymore," she whispered, her voice shaking with regret. The figure behind them chuckled darkly. "It's too late for that. She's mine. You are mine." And then, in a flash of movement, the figure lunged forward, his hand reaching for Eliza's throat. Annabelle screamed, but she was too slow. The figure's hand wrapped around Eliza's neck, lifting her off the ground with unnatural strength. Eliza's body convulsed as the evil spirit consumed her once more. With a desperate cry, Annabelle did the only thing she could think of. She lunged forward, slamming the obsidian shard into the ground at the base of the tree's roots, what was left of them. She shouted the words, the same incantation that had freed Eliza before, hoping it would work again. "In darkness and death, I offer my soul. Let the curse be broken and the spirits be freed." The world around her shook violently. The sky darkened, the trees groaned with agony, and for a moment there was a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, everything was still. The figure was gone. The evil was gone. Eliza collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, her body shaking violently. But Annabelle knew in her heart that this wasn't over. The evil was cunning. It would never truly be vanquished. It had already planted the seed of darkness within her granddaughter, and it would grow again somewhere, sometime, perhaps when they least expected it. Annabelle gazed down at Eliza, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the fight was never truly won. The curse wasn't just a tree, a spirit, or a curse. It was the land itself. And as long as the land remained, the darkness would always return. Years later, The town of West Hollow would return to its sleepy ways, though there would always be an undercurrent of fear. The blackthorn tree was gone, and so was the evil spirit, but the memory lingered. Annabelle, now much older and weary, would often find herself walking through the woods, searching, watching. She knew the darkness had not been destroyed, only delayed, and one evening, as the wind howled through the trees, Annabelle felt it again, the pull of the curse. The land itself seemed to breathe, waiting for the inevitable return of what had once been unleashed. She would never stop searching, because she knew deep in her bones that the cycle would repeat. It was just a matter of time. The woods had changed since that fateful night, though few in the town of West Hollow dared to speak of what had transpired beneath the shadows of the cursed blackthorn tree. The trees were taller now, their gnarled branches weaving together like ancient fingers reaching for the heavens, as if still haunted by the evil that had once plagued the land. Annabelle had grown older, her once sharp eyes now clouded with the weight of time and regret. Her steps were slow and deliberate, as though the earth beneath her feet was too heavy to bear. But still, she walked, a part of her heart bound to the woods, to the land that had consumed her daughter and nearly destroyed her granddaughter. Eliza had recovered, or so it seemed. She had returned to her life in the town, the same bright girl who had once danced through the streets, laughing with her friends. But Annabelle saw the truth. The darkness was still within her, festering, waiting. The light in her eyes was dimmed, and at times, Annabelle would catch her granddaughter staring out at the woods, as though something were calling to her. The town had changed as well. People spoke in hushed tones when they passed the old woman in the street, their eyes filled with a quiet terror. They had all felt it, the creeping, unsettling sense that something was still wrong. The disappearances had stopped, yes, but the sense of dread that hung in the air was palpable. And then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the wind began to rise, it happened again. Eliza was missing. Annabelle's heart sank as the news spread through the town. It was just after dark when the first screams were heard. People ran through the streets calling out for Eliza, but the night was eerily quiet. A cold fog had rolled in from the east, thick and oppressive. It clung to the ground like something alive, crawling up the sides of buildings, seeping into every corner of the town. Annabelle knew where Eliza had gone before anyone else did. The woods, the same place where the curse had first taken root. She had to get there. There was no time to lose. She had tried to warn Eliza, tried to explain that the curse could never truly be defeated, that it was part of the land, part of the earth itself, and no matter how much they fought, it would always find a way back. But Eliza had refused to listen. The curse was a part of her now, a deep, insidious part that neither time nor distance could erase. The wind howled through the trees as Annabelle made her way to the clearing. The fog had thickened, and the world felt distorted, as though the very fabric of reality was fraying at the edges. The air was colder than it had been that night years ago, when they had fought to break the curse. A chill crawled down Annabelle's spine, and she felt the familiar tug of the land, the pull of something darker. When she reached the clearing, she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. There, in the center of the clearing, was Eliza, but she was no longer the girl Annabelle had known. Her hair was longer, darker, tangled with twigs and leaves. Her skin was pale, as though the life had been drained from her. Her eyes were wide, staring into the distance, vacant and empty. The same eyes that had once been filled with light, now mirrors of the blackthorn tree's darkness. "Eliza!" Annabelle cried, rushing forward. "No, not again. You have to fight it. Please, you have to come back." But Eliza didn't respond. She stood motionless, as if entranced by something only she could see. The ground beneath her feet began to shift, the earth writhing like it was alive. The air was thick with the sound of low murmurs, whispers that echoed from the depths of the earth itself. And then, out of the fog, the figure appeared, the same dark shape that had haunted them all those years ago, the one that had claimed the blackthorn tree. His eyes glowed with the same eerie, sickly light, and his grin spread wider as he stepped into the clearing. The ground seemed to crack and shift beneath his presence, the earth itself bowing to his will. "You came back," the figure hissed, his voice cold and jagged. "I knew you would. You never learn." Annabelle's heart beat faster. She could feel the weight of his presence pressing down on her, suffocating her, but she had to save Eliza. This time there was no ritual, no incantation. There was only one choice left. She rushed toward Eliza, but the figure blocked her path, his hand raised in a mocking gesture. "You think you can stop me? You think you can save her again?" he sneered. "The darkness has always been here, old woman. It was never just the tree. It was always the land, always the blood." Annabelle froze, her breath catching in her throat. "The blood?" she repeated, her mind racing to understand. "The bloodline," the figure growled. "The curse was passed down through the generations. It was never about Eliza. It was always about you." Annabelle's eyes widened. She realized then what she had overlooked all this time, the dark truth she had been too afraid to face. The curse hadn't started with the blackthorn tree. It had started long before, with her own ancestors, perhaps even before the land had been settled. The evil had been bound to her bloodline, and no matter how many rituals or sacrifices were made, it would always return, like a sickness that could not be cured. "Eliza, no," Annabelle whispered, reaching out to her granddaughter. But Eliza turned her head slowly, her eyes black as night. "You were never meant to fight this. You were born to carry it." The figure's laughter echoed through the clearing, filling the air with a terrible, hollow sound. "And now, child, you will give it to her." Annabelle's heart shattered as Eliza's eyes locked onto her, the pull of the curse stronger than ever before. The figure stepped aside, gesturing for Annabelle to approach. But her mind was spinning. There was only one way left to save Eliza, and it was the hardest choice she had ever had to make. She could feel the darkness growing stronger inside her granddaughter, twisting her mind and body. But Annabelle also knew what would happen if she didn't act. If she let the curse take Eliza completely, there would be no turning back. The evil would spread to the entire town, and then to the world itself. It would be unstoppable, but the land would never be free. Not truly. The curse had always been tied to her family. It was a cycle that had existed for centuries. The land had always craved it. And now, it was her turn to make the ultimate sacrifice. "Eliza," Annabelle said, her voice breaking, "I love you, but this must end. This must end now." With trembling hands, she took the obsidian shard from her pocket. the same one that had once severed the curse, the same one that had broken the tree. She pressed it against her chest, just over her heart, as tears blurred her vision. "You will carry the curse no longer," she whispered. "Let it be mine. Let it stay with me so you can be free." Before Eliza could react, before the figure could stop her, Annabelle drove the obsidian shard into her own chest. The world around her exploded in a surge of darkness and light. The wind screamed in agony as the earth cracked open, the land itself weeping for what was lost. And then, silence. West Hollow was quiet once more, its people unaware of the sacrifice made to save them all. Annabelle was gone, her body lost to the land, bound forever to the bloodline that had cursed her family for generations. Eliza was free. The curse was broken, for now. But as she stood at the edge of the woods, looking at the place where her grandmother had fallen, she felt the pull again, the whisper in the wind, the distant call of the land. It was still there, waiting, watching, and she knew that one day the cycle would begin again. Weeks passed, and the town of West Hollow returned to its mundane routine, though the shadow of what had happened lingered over them like a dark cloud, ever present, though most refused to acknowledge it. The disappearance of Annabelle was quietly swept under the rug, her absence masked by whispers and uneasy glances. People no longer spoke openly of the curse, of Eliza's madness, or of the twisted events that had haunted their town. Eliza, in her grief, did her best to move forward, burying her memories in the terrible truth of what had happened. She no longer wandered the woods. The whispers of the cursed land no longer pulled at her, and the nightmares seemed to fade. But as the months turned into years, Eliza began to feel the subtle, unmistakable signs. The coldness in the air that seemed to follow her, the way the trees appeared to bend when she walked through the woods, as if watching her. There were times she thought she could hear voices in the wind, faint whispers calling her name. Yet, each time she would shake it off, dismissing it as the product of her overactive imagination, until the day she saw it. It happened in the dead of night. Eliza had been lying awake in her bed, her thoughts restless, when the moonlight streaming through the window cast a strange, unsettling glow over the room. She turned toward the window, the trees outside swaying eerily in the wind, their shadows creeping across the walls. Something felt wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it. An unnatural stillness in the air, a sense of waiting. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. The blackthorn tree standing just beyond the tree line, where the woods grew thick. She hadn't seen it in years. She thought it was gone, burned to the ground, consumed by the forces that had battled against it. But there it was, tall, twisted, its gnarled branches stretching toward the sky, dark, malevolent, as though it had never been destroyed at all. Her breath caught in her throat. No, it couldn't be. The whispers began again, only this time they weren't just whispers. The voice of the spirit, the one that had once haunted her, seemed to resonate from the tree itself. Eliza, come. Her body stiffened with terror. She knew what it meant, the curse. It had never truly been broken. It had merely been dormant, waiting, hidden beneath the surface, like a wound that hadn't yet healed. It had been bound to her bloodline, tied to the land, to the very essence of the earth itself. She forced herself out of bed, her feet heavy on the floor as she walked toward the window. She had to see it. had to know if what she was seeing was real. She had to understand. When she stepped outside, the chill of the night air bit at her skin, the fog rolling in thick and heavy, shrouding the landscape. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way toward the clearing. Each step felt as though it took her further into the past, deeper into the nightmare that had shaped her life. The blackthorn tree stood there waiting, and then she heard it, footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking with her just out of sight. "Eliza." The voice was familiar. It was Annabelle's. Her body froze. She spun around, her breath coming in shallow gasps, but there was no one there. "Eliza, you must come back." The words seemed to drift on the wind, coming from all around her, yet there was no one in sight. "Eliza." The voice grew louder now, insistent. And with it, the earth seemed to tremble beneath her feet, as though the very ground was alive, hungry. Her mind reeled. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. Annabelle was gone. She had made the sacrifice. Eliza had been free. But then she remembered something her grandmother had told her long ago. "You cannot escape the curse, Eliza. It is born from the land, born of our bloodline. It is tied to the earth, to the very roots of this place." And now, standing beneath the shadow of the blackthorn tree, Eliza understood. The wind picked up again, violently, howling through the trees, bending the branches as though they were caught in an invisible storm. The ground cracked open beneath her feet, deep fissures splitting the earth as if the land were ripping itself apart. And in the center of the clearing, the blackthorn tree began to stir, its gnarled branches stretching and twisting as if alive, pulsing with a sickly dark energy. Eliza staggered back, her heart racing. She had felt it, the land's deep hunger, the tree's thirst, but she didn't know how to stop it. She didn't know what to do. And then the voice came again, this time from within her own mind. "Eliza, you are mine. You were always mine. You were born to carry the curse, and you will never be free." She clutched her head in her hands, the voices screaming inside her skull. Her vision blurred, and she felt the dark energy pulsing through her veins, the same dark force that had once consumed her body, her mind. The tree's branches seemed to reach for her, its roots extending, twisting beneath the earth, finding their way to her feet. And then she saw it. Annabelle, standing at the edge of the clearing. Her eyes were dark, hollow, as though she had been twisted by the same evil that had once consumed Eliza. "Eliza," Annabelle's voice echoed, "you have to end it. You must end it now." But the curse had already taken root again. The darkness was too strong, the bloodline too tainted. There was no escaping it. "Eliza," Annabelle's voice cracked, "you must choose. Let it end with you." Eliza's body trembled, but the darkness in her mind twisted, turning her thoughts cold, distant. She couldn't feel the love anymore, not for herself, not for her grandmother. All she could feel was the overwhelming pull of the curse, the insatiable hunger of the land, the tree which had never truly been destroyed. And Eliza realized something then, something that chilled her to the bone. The curse was not just a force, it was alive. It was not bound to a place, not even to a bloodline. It was tied to her very soul, and no matter what she did, it would always return. She could not escape it. With trembling hands, Eliza walked toward the tree. The land groaned beneath her, the earth shifting like it was breathing. Every step she took toward the tree felt like it was taking her deeper into darkness, Her feet felt heavy, as if she were sinking into the ground itself. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough bark of the blackthorn tree. "Yes," the tree whispered in her mind. "Embrace me. Embrace your true nature. You were always meant to be mine." Her mind fractured as the tree's power surged through her, and for a moment she remembered her grandmother's words, "You must choose." And so, in that moment, Eliza made the only choice she could. She bent down and pressed her palm against the tree's dark, gnarled surface. The ground trembled violently, the air thick with a soundless roar, as the land consumed her once again. The curse was reborn. Years passed, and West Hollow grew quiet once more. The people spoke of the strange happenings that had befallen the town, but they did not speak of Eliza. They did not speak of the blackthorn tree, whose roots had once again taken hold of the land. And yet, on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the trees, when the fog rolled in thick and heavy, there would be those who swore they heard her voice on the wind. Eliza, calling, forever bound to the land, forever a part of the curse. The town of Varnell, Virginia, was the kind of place where time seemed to move at its own unhurried pace. The sleepy streets, lined with old brick buildings, were mostly quiet, save for the occasional hum of a passing car or the distant crowing of roosters at dawn. Nestled among the hills of the Appalachian Mountains, Varnell's charm was in its solitude, its history woven into the fabric of the town, its secrets buried beneath layers of dust and time. Harold Greaves had always known that his work as an undertaker in this forgotten corner of the world was more than a job. It was a family legacy. His father, his grandfather, and even his great-grandfather had all served as the caretakers of the dead in Varnell. The Greaves Funeral Home, an old and unassuming building that had been passed down through generations, was where the town's dead came to rest. Harold had spent countless years embalming bodies, arranging funerals, and making sure that the dead were at peace. It was a profession that demanded respect and a certain distance from the horrors of life. But something had changed. Something dark had begun to seep into the fabric of Harold's work. It started with a sound. Late one night, as Harold carefully prepared the body of a man named Richard Blackwell, the notorious local serial killer, for burial, he heard a faint tapping from the embalming room's storage closet. At first, he thought it was a rat or perhaps just the building settling, but then it came again, louder this time, rhythmic and insistent, as if someone or something was trying to escape. Harold froze. He stood still for a long moment, listening. A cold sweat crept up his spine. Blackwell's body, lying still on the table, seemed to mock him, its hollow eyes staring into his own, as though something far darker than death had taken residence inside it. Harold tried to push the thought aside. After all, it was just a body, a corpse, nothing more. But when he opened the closet door, he found nothing. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had started, and he felt foolish for even thinking it had been something worth fearing. Yet, the hairs on the back of his neck refused to settle, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he returned to Blackwell's body, something unusual caught his eye. The embalming fluid in the man's veins seemed to glisten, almost as if it was moving on its own. The skin around Blackwell's neck was slightly twitching, and Harold felt a tremor of unease ripple through him. This wasn't right. The embalming process was supposed to preserve the body in a state of rigor mortis, an unnatural stasis, but Blackwell's corpse looked too alive. Harold had seen dead bodies for years, but he had never seen anything like this. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He'd been working too long without sleep, he reasoned. The fatigue was playing tricks on his mind. That night, he decided to stay in the funeral home, waiting for the embalming process to settle, assuring himself that this was just a lingering sense of dread that came with the job. But when the clock struck midnight, the tapping started again. Only this time, it was not coming from the closet. It came from the body on the table. Harold's heart thudded painfully in his chest. His eyes widened in disbelief as the fingers of Richard Blackwell twitched. Then slowly, like the crawling fingers of some monstrous creature, the hand began to move. It curled into a fist and slammed against the table. A violent, ragged breath escaped from Blackwell's mouth. And then the eyes opened. The lifeless gaze, once cold and empty, now glowed with malevolent intent. The room filled with a horrid, unnatural groan. "Harold!" The whisper was faint, like a breath barely escaping the mouth of the corpse. But the words were unmistakable. Blackwell wasn't dead. Harold's mind spun. The body on the table was supposed to be dead in a way that no life should ever return from. He had seen it before, the strange stillness that embalming caused, the way it stilled even the most violent of spirits. But now, this was different. He stumbled backward, his knees buckling as he backed into the wall. His eyes never left the reanimated corpse, watching as its body shuddered, convulsing violently, as though it was awakening from a deep sleep. "Please," Harold gasped, his throat dry, as he reached for the phone on his desk. He couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. This wasn't possible. Bodies didn't just come back to life, not even serial killers like Richard Blackwell. "Don't be afraid, Harold." The voice came again, but this time it wasn't just Blackwell's. It was a chorus of voices, a deep guttural sound, like 1,000 souls speaking at once. The room seemed to grow colder as Harold fumbled with the phone, his hands shaking violently. But before he could dial, the power cut out. The lights flickered, leaving him in darkness save for the faint moonlight that streamed in through the grimy window. A deafening silence followed, and then the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the room. "Harold," the voice said again, closer now. It was then that he understood. The bodies, all the bodies he had buried, all the killers he had embalmed were rising. And they weren't just waking up, they were hunting him. The footsteps grew louder, heavy and deliberate, dragging along the cold floor of the embalming room like a death march. Harold's breath caught in his throat as he pressed himself into the corner of the room, desperately searching for some way to escape. But there was nowhere to go. He was trapped in the very place where death had become something alive. His heart pounded in his chest, the rhythmic thudding deafening in the silence. He could hear them now, the voices disembodied and broken, murmuring his name. They weren't just Blackwell's, but the other victims, the men and women who had haunted the news years ago. They were the ghosts of Varnell's dark past, the killers whose brutal acts had plagued the town. They were supposed to be gone, buried and forgotten, but now they were back, alive and vengeful. "Harold," His stomach twisted as the whisper came again, this time right beside him. He dared not turn, for fear of seeing the ghastly sight that waited for him. He could feel the presence, though, suffocating, like a storm cloud looming overhead, dark and inescapable. "Why did you do it?" The voice of Richard Blackwell croaked from the shadows. The chilling, familiar tone of the killer, the man who had once terrorized the town, sent shivers down Harold's spine. "You knew the truth. You knew what we were." Harold's legs were weak, his body trembling. His mind was racing, trying to comprehend what was happening. He had worked as an undertaker for years, never asking too many questions about the bodies he handled. He embalmed the dead, buried them, and went home. It was a simple routine, or so he thought. But now it was clear that there was something far darker, something far more insidious at play. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even move. His mind flashed back to the strange feeling he'd had ever since he inherited the funeral home. How his family had always treated the place like a sacred trust, as if something about it needed to be protected, kept secret. His father had been adamant about certain things, never asking too many questions, never digging too deep. And yet here he was, at the epicenter of a nightmare that could never be explained by logic or science. These killers weren't just dead, they were back, hungry for blood, with a thirst that could not be quenched. And he, Harold Greaves, had become the unwilling architect of their resurrection. Suddenly, the body of Blackwell began to twitch violently. His skeletal hand, now clawing at the table, split the skin and the flesh. The corpse groaned as it slowly sat up, its lifeless eyes now wide open, staring directly at Harold. Its lips curled into a grotesque smile. "You shouldn't have done it, Harold," the body rasped, its voice full of malice. "We never died. You were supposed to keep us asleep." Harold's mind raced. Keep them asleep? What was he talking about? He had to get out. He had to survive. But there was nowhere to run. He had heard of the old rumors, the whispers in town about a dark cult that had once existed in the hills, a secret society that performed ancient rituals, summoning death and life in twisted ceremonies. His grandfather had warned him about it, but the warnings were always shrouded in mystery, like a family curse too dangerous to acknowledge. That was when it hit him, the embalming, the bodies. They weren't just embalmed, they were cursed, bound by blood to rise again, to fulfill their twisted cycle of death. His family had been keeping the town's dark legacy hidden. They had been the caretakers of the dead for generations, but they had never understood the true horror they were protecting. "Harold." The voice of Blackwell trembled with cruel delight. "You have no idea what you've awakened." In the dim light of the funeral home, Harold could feel his legs give way. His body collapsed onto the cold, hard floor. He could hear the shuffle of more footsteps now, each one a grotesque echo of the last. One by one, they were rising. The infamous killers from Varnell's past, men and women who had once caused unspeakable terror in the area, had all returned. Their faces were no longer the same. Their skin was decayed, pulled taut over skeletal frames, but there was an unmistakable malevolence in their eyes. A hunger, help, me. The voice of an old woman, once known for her brutal killings, wailed from the shadows. Harold's head spun. How was this happening? He fumbled for the phone again, but the line was dead. The room seemed to close in on him, each breath heavier than the last. The shadows grew longer, more suffocating. He could feel them drawing near, their rancid breath thick in the air. The smell of decay, of death, filled his senses, nearly choking him. "Do you know why we're here, Harold?" Another voice, guttural and low, whispered in his ear. It was the voice of someone he hadn't heard in years. Samantha Warren, a notorious local serial killer from decades ago. Her face, now skeletal and twisted, grinned at him through the darkness. "We're here because of you, because of your family." The realization hit Harold like a tidal wave. His family, the Greaves family, had been guarding something far more dangerous than just the dead. The funeral home, this place that had been his inheritance, had been the key to keeping the curse at bay. Each body, each killer that had been embalmed and placed in the ground, was bound to a ritual that had been carried out for generations, one designed to keep the dead from rising again. The curse was tied to his bloodline. It always had been. "Your family's sins are our salvation," Samantha's voice echoed as the others began to shuffle forward, closing in on him. "And now, Harold, now it's your turn to join us." The weight of the curse pressed down on Harold's chest, suffocating him. His family's twisted legacy was now his responsibility, but there was no escaping it. The killers were here, and they would never stop until they had what they came for. Harold's mind raced. He had to stop them. There had to be a way to end this, to break the cycle of death that had plagued his family for generations. But first, he had to understand the dark ritual that bound the killers to the earth and to his family. The sheriff, Sheriff Avery. Maybe, just maybe, she could help him unravel the truth. But would she believe him? Could he convince her in time to stop the killers before the entire town was consumed by the curse? Harold could feel his blood running cold as the realization dawned. There was only one way to end this, but to do so, he would have to sacrifice everything. The room felt like it was closing in, the weight of 1,000 deaths pressing down on Harold's shoulders. The killers, once human, now only shadows of the monsters they had been, stood in a circle around him, their hollow eyes fixed with murderous intent. They were not merely the ghosts of the past, they were the living dead, reanimated by a curse that no one, not even Harold himself, fully understood. The air was thick with the smell of rot, an overpowering stench that clung to everything. The bodies of the killers shuffled toward him, their unnatural movements slow and deliberate. Every step they took echoed with the sounds of bones scraping against the floor. Their grotesque, decayed forms the twisted evidence of something far darker than mere resurrection. "Your bloodline is our salvation." Samantha Warren's voice, now a rasping, guttural whisper, cut through the air. "Your grandfather made sure of that. He and his brothers. Your family has always been the gatekeepers. You hold the key to the curse, Harold." Harold's head swam with confusion and terror. His family had always been mysterious about the funeral home's history, especially his grandfather. He remembered the long nights as a child when his grandfather had locked himself away in the basement, muttering about secrets too dangerous to share. The old man had spoken in hushed tones, warning Harold about the power buried beneath the earth, but he had never explained the full truth. Now it seemed the time had come to face that truth. "Why me?" Harold croaked, his voice weak but desperate. "Why are you here? What do you want?" A soft laugh, hollow and chilling, filled the room. Blackwell, who had risen first, stepped forward, his skeletal grin wider than it should have been. His voice was like gravel scraping against stone. "We're not here for your soul, Harold. Not yet. We're here because we can never be free, and neither can you. Not unless you end it." Harold's mind raced, each piece of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. The killers weren't after him for revenge. They were trapped by the curse that had bound them to this world, and the only way to free them and himself was to break the cycle. Break the cycle. The phrase echoed in his mind, a fleeting hope. But how? How could he stop something so ancient, so deeply ingrained in his family's history? He glanced around the room, his eyes locking onto the embalmed bodies of the killers who stood in their slow, torturous movements. Each one had a history, a story that had ended too violently, too abruptly, and now they had returned to finish what they started. But as Harold stood there, his body frozen with fear, another voice broke through the chaos, the voice of Sheriff Avery. "Harold," she called from the doorway. Harold's heart skipped a beat. His breath caught in his throat. How had she found him? He hadn't told anyone. No one would believe him. He couldn't risk involving her, not in this. Avery stepped into the room, her gun drawn. The sheriff's face was pale, her eyes wide with confusion and fear as she took in the horrific scene. She hesitated for only a moment before barking, "What in the hell is going on here, Harold?" Harold's mind screamed at him to run, to explain, but the words were stuck in his throat. The killers were closing in. The air grew colder still, and every flickering shadow seemed to pulse with hunger. He had to make a choice. "Get out of here, Avery," Harold shouted, his voice trembling with panic. "It's too late. You don't understand." "You're right. I don't understand, Harold, but I'm not leaving without you." Her voice was unwavering, though her hand shook slightly as she aimed the gun toward Blackwell, who had taken another step forward. Harold's heart hammered. She doesn't know what she's dealing with. These killers were not ordinary criminals. They were part of something far darker than she could fathom. Avery's gun fired with a sharp crack, but it barely fazed Blackwell. He didn't even flinch. The bullet lodged in the reanimated corpse's chest, but the body didn't even react. "I told you," Blackwell hissed, his hollow voice filled with derision. "You cannot kill what's already dead." Avery's face twisted with shock and confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" she demanded, her finger tightening on the trigger. Harold's pulse raced. She's going to get herself killed. "Avery, no!" Harold yelled, but it was too late. The sheriff's finger squeezed the trigger again, and another shot rang out, but the killers didn't flinch. Harold realized that the bullets wouldn't stop them. They were already dead. To destroy them, to end their reign of terror, he would need to do something far darker than he ever imagined. "Harold, I don't care what's going on here," Avery said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I'm taking you with me." But Harold's gaze had already shifted to the basement door, the one his grandfather had warned him never to open. A cold chill ran down his spine as he realized that the key to everything, the answer to ending this nightmare, was buried deep beneath the funeral home. His grandfather's cryptic warnings echoed in his mind. "The basement, the rituals," Harold whispered under his breath, barely able to keep his thoughts straight. He looked back at Avery, a strange mix of determination and despair in his eyes. "The basement, it's the only way." We have to end this now." Avery, though skeptical, didn't hesitate. She nodded sharply. "Then let's go." The basement door creaked open, revealing a long, dark hallway. The air was thick with the scent of old earth, the kind of damp, musty air that spoke of forgotten things buried beneath the earth's surface. Harold's pulse thudded in his ears as he led the way down the stairs, Avery following close behind. Each step they took seemed to grow heavier, the silence around them oppressive, as though the house itself was holding its breath. The further they descended, the colder it became. A shiver ran down Harold's spine, and for the first time he realized the true weight of his family's legacy. In the farthest corner of the basement, an ancient altar stood, carved into the stone. The symbols on its surface were barely visible, worn by time, but they still pulsed with a malevolent energy. Harold knew immediately that this was where it had all begun, the dark ritual that had cursed his family, binding the killers to the earth. The altar had been used for one purpose, to bring death and to force the dead to return. "It's here," Harold whispered, "the ritual to bind them, and the only way to end it." Avery's brow furrowed, but she didn't question him. The desperation in Harold's eyes was all she needed to see. Before either of them could act, a guttural scream echoed from the top of the stairs. It was the voice of Richard Blackwell, distorted and maddened by the curse. "They're coming," Harold said, his voice breaking. "We have to hurry." The air in the basement was thick with the oppressive scent of decay, like the earth had been steeped in centuries of death. The dim light from the bare bulb overhead cast long, distorted shadows across the walls. Harold's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the altar, the weight of his family's curse bearing down on him with every step. He could feel the presence of the killers upstairs, their twisted souls hungry for blood, but there was no turning back. He had to end this. The altar, covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark, ancient energy, stood before him, its surface carved from the same stone that lined the walls of the funeral home. The symbols, once faint, were now coming to life, glowing faintly as if reacting to the very air. Each of them was a piece of the ritual, a dark and unholy binding that had held the killers' souls in thrall for generations. Harold's hand hovered over the altar, trembling. His grandfather had never told him the full truth about what was required to stop the curse, only warning him that once it was set in motion, it could never be undone. The ritual demanded a blood price, one that would tie Harold forever to the darkness that had claimed his family. But there was no choice now. "Avery, we need to act fast," Harold said, his voice low, urgent. "They'll be down here soon. I can feel them." Avery nodded, her grip tightening on the gun she had slung across her shoulder, though she knew it would be useless against what was coming. She glanced nervously toward the stairs, but Harold could see the doubt in her eyes. The sheriff, a woman who had dealt with all manner of human evil, was now standing on the edge of a much deeper horror, something no one could truly prepare for. "Harold," Avery began, her voice hesitant, "what exactly are we doing here? What's the way to stop this?" Harold took a deep breath, his eyes darting from the altar to the dim light above them. He had to explain. There was no time to waste. "My family. We've been guarding this evil for generations. The killers, they were never just criminals. They were part of a ritual, an ancient curse, performed by an old cult in the hills. When my family took over this funeral home, we became the keepers of that curse. The embalming process, everything I've done, was part of keeping them trapped. But now, the ritual's weakening, and they've come back. They're not alive, but they're not truly dead either. And unless I do this, he paused, swallowing hard. Unless I end this, they will keep coming back over and over again. They'll tear this town apart, and I'll never be free. Avery's face twisted in confusion, but there was no time for her to process it all. The killers were close. He could feel them. The ritual, the only way to end it. Harold murmured, more to himself than to her. He could barely bring himself to speak the words, but he knew what needed to be done. His hand hovered over the symbols, finding the one that seemed to glow faintest, the one that resonated with an energy he couldn't explain. It requires blood, my blood, the blood of the last grieves to finish the cycle. Avery's eyes widened. You mean I have to offer myself? Harold finished, his voice barely above a whisper. The curse is tied to my bloodline. To break it, I need to give my life. Avery's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. No, there has to be another way. We can fight them, I don't have a choice. Harold's voice was firm, but there was a deep sadness in his eyes. This is the only way. If I don't do it now, they'll come back. My family's kept them contained for too long, and it's my responsibility to put an end to it, forever. Avery looked at him, her expression torn between disbelief and desperation, but she knew, deep down, that there was no turning back. They were facing something beyond anything she had ever encountered, and Harold was the key. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. The weight of the moment crushed her, and she simply nodded. I'll be with you, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper in the cold air of the basement. Harold nodded grimly, turning back to the altar. The killers would be down here soon. He could feel their malevolent presence creeping closer. There was no time left. As Harold raised his hand to press his blood to the symbols, a deafening crash echoed from the top of the stairs. The killers had arrived. Before Harold could complete the ritual, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and the killers appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Blackwell led the charge, his eyes glowing with that same sickening hunger. Behind him came the others, Samantha Warren, the twisted faces of the victims who had been bound to the curse for so long. Avery raised her gun, but it was clear by their movements that they wouldn't be stopped by bullets. The killers moved with an unnatural speed, their bodies jerking and twitching in grotesque motions, but there was nothing human left in them. Their eyes, cold and empty, burned with malevolent intelligence. Harold, hurry! Avery shouted, panic lacing her voice. She aimed her gun and fired, but the bullets passed through Blackwell as though he were nothing more than mist. Harold's hands shook as he pressed his palm against the altar. Blood dripped from his fingers, staining the symbols. They flared to life, glowing brighter, pulsing with dark energy, and the ground beneath him seemed to crack open, as if the very earth was rejecting the curse that had been buried within it for so long. The killers let out a shriek of rage as the ritual began to take hold. The symbols on the altar glowed brighter, their dark energy building. The walls of the basement seemed to warp, the air growing heavier with every passing second. A powerful wind howled through the room, pushing back against Avery and Harold, knocking them to the ground. "No!" Blackwell screamed, his voice a twisted mockery of life. "You can't do this!" But Harold didn't waver. He knew this was the only way. He could feel the curse, the ancient magic, pulsing through his veins, urging him to finish the ritual. The killer's screams filled the air, a cacophony of tortured souls begging for release. But they would never be free, not unless Harold gave everything he had. With one final desperate push, Harold pressed his palm fully against the altar. The symbols flared blindingly bright, and a surge of energy shot through him, his body convulsing with pain. It was as if every cell in his body was being ripped apart and reassembled at the same time. "I'm sorry," Harold whispered, his voice hoarse with the effort. And then, with a final deafening roar, the curse was broken. Silence. For a long, eternal moment, there was nothing but stillness. The wind had stopped. The earth had ceased to tremble. The killers were gone. The altar's glow faded, leaving only the faintest traces of dark energy behind. Harold lay on the floor, his body battered and broken, but his mind was clear. He had done it. The curse was broken. The killers, his family's dark legacy, had been put to rest. Avery knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she checked for signs of life. She found none. His body was cold, still. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. Harold Greaves had sacrificed himself to save them all. Varnell would never be the same. The town that had once been haunted by the ghosts of serial killers and cursed souls was now free. Free of the ancient evil that had lived beneath its streets for so long. The Greaves funeral home, once a place of death, was now empty. No one would ever bury the dead there again. As for Sheriff Avery, she never forgot Harold. She couldn't. His sacrifice had ended a nightmare, but it had also claimed the life of the man who had fought so hard to destroy it. The curse was broken, but the memory of what Harold had done would linger in the town for generations to come. And somewhere, in the distant hills, the whispers of the ancient cult were still waiting, watching.